After 8 years of marriage, my husband walked into our custom kitchen holding hands with a 26-year-old yoga instructor. He threw divorce papers on my marble island and told me he had finally found his true love because she was simple, pure, and did not care about money or status the way I did. I did not shed a single tear. I just smiled, pulled out my phone, called my assistant, and said block his cards, cancel his mother's medication, and change the locks in the house. If you have ever had a partner mistake your quiet grind for weakness, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe to see exactly how I dismantled his entire world before his new girlfriend could even unpack her sage and crystals. My name is Renee. I am 32 years old and the CEO of a financial technology auditing firm that I built from the ground up right here in Atlanta. It was a crisp Tuesday morning. I was standing at my kitchen island sipping a dark roast espresso, reviewing a quarterly compliance report on my tablet. I was wearing a simple beige cashmere lounge set, enjoying a rare morning off before a major client meeting. The front door chimed, signaling an entry code being used. I expected it to be Andre, my 34-year-old husband, returning from what he claimed was an early morning marketing strategy session. He was a mid-level manager at a public relations agency, a job he landed mostly because he looked good in a tailored suit and knew exactly how to charm a room full of executives. But when he walked into the kitchen, he was not alone. His fingers were tightly intertwined with those of a young woman I had never seen before. She looked about 26, wearing high-end athletic leggings, a cropped top, and a woven tote bag that screamed overpriced spiritual wellness retreat. She had this practiced, serene smile on her face, the kind people use when they want to appear enlightened, but really just want to show off their expensive dental veneers. Andre did not even have the decency to look guilty or ashamed. He walked right up to the marble island, pulled a thick manila envelope from his leather briefcase, and dropped it right next to my coffee mug. The sound was sharp in the quiet kitchen. He stood tall, puffing his chest out clearly, having rehearsed this exact moment in his head for weeks. "Renee, I am filing for divorce," he announced, his voice echoing in the high-ceilinged room. "This is Brooke. She is my soulmate. I finally found someone who truly understands me." I slowly set my espresso mug down, making sure it rested perfectly on the coaster. I looked from the divorce papers to him, then to the girl who was now gazing at Andre with wide, adoring eyes. "She is simple." Renee, Andre continued, his tone dripping with a condescending pity that made my blood run cold. "She is pure. She actually values human connection. She does not care about money or status or spending 80 hours a week staring at spreadsheets like you do. I am tired of living with a corporate robot. I need a woman who actually has a soul. You care more about your auditing algorithms than you ever cared about this marriage. I tolerated your boring workaholic life for 8 years. I held this household together while you were locked in your home office." I stayed quiet, letting him talk, listening as he rewrote our entire history to justify his infidelity. He conveniently left out that my 80-hour work weeks paid for his designer watch collection, his exclusive golf club memberships, and the very roof over his head. He acted as if his job, which barely covered his personal grooming expenses and expensive happy hours, was the financial bedrock of our existence. "So I am taking what I am owed," Andre declared, slapping his hand on the marble counter for emphasis. "My lawyer has drawn up the papers. Since you built your little company while we were married, I am legally entitled to 50% of it, plus half the value of this house and lifelong alimony. Consider it back pay for my wasted youth." I looked at Brooke. She gave me a soft, pitying look, tilting her head to the side. "We do not want to hurt you, Renee," she said, her voice breathy and gentle. "We just want to live our truth. I hope you can find peace and maybe learn to detach from your material possessions." The sheer audacity of her standing in my $2 million home, telling me to detach from material possessions, almost made me laugh out loud. Almost. Instead, I maintained a perfectly neutral expression. I did not scream. I did not throw my coffee at them. I picked up my phone and dialed my assistant, David. He answered on the first ring. David, I said, keeping my voice steady and pleasant. Execute the contingency plan we discussed last month. Block all authorized user access on my corporate and personal accounts immediately. Yes, especially the Platinum card. Cancel the recurring payments for his mother's private clinic. And call the security company to change all the access codes and physical locks on the estate by noon today. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Andre burst into laughter, shaking his head. He looked at Brooke and rolled his eyes. This is exactly what I'm talking about, he sneered, always trying to play the ruthless executive. You think a few canceled credit cards from your little startup are going to scare me? I have a director-level salary, Renee. I make my own money. And I own half of this estate. You cannot just lock me out of my own house. You are acting crazy because you are in shock. It is pathetic, honestly. You think your little auditing software makes you untouchable? Please. He grabbed Brooke's hand again, pulling her toward the hallway. Come on, babe. We are not going to stand here and watch her have a mental breakdown. We have reservations at that new brunch spot downtown. We will take the Porsche and celebrate our new life. They turned their backs on me, walking out the front door with the kind of arrogance that only comes from deep, unwavering ignorance. I picked up my espresso, taking a slow sip, waiting. It took exactly 4 minutes. The heavy oak front door flew open. Andre stumbled back into the foyer, his face completely drained of color, his earlier swagger entirely vanished. He pointed a trembling finger toward the driveway. Why, he stammered, his voice cracking. Why is there a tow truck hooking up my car? I smiled a genuine warm smile and leaned against the counter. What did you do to my car? Andre demanded, his voice cracking, as he pointed a trembling finger at the window. The tow truck driver was already securing the front wheels of the pristine black Porsche. I took a slow sip of my espresso, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make him sweat. That is not your car, Andre, I said, my voice perfectly level. That vehicle is leased under Apex Global Logistics. Since you just marched into my kitchen and announced you are no longer a part of my life, you are no longer an authorized representative of my company. My insurance policy requires me to secure all corporate assets immediately. It is standard liability protocol. Andre stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He looked from me to the tow truck and back again. You cannot do this. I am your husband. I need that car for my client meetings. I set my mug down on the marble island. You need that car to impress 26-year-old yoga instructors, I corrected him. If you want to drive a $100,000 vehicle, you can buy one with that director-level salary you were just bragging about. Or better yet, maybe Brooke can manifest a ride for you using her healing crystals. Brooke shifted uncomfortably on her feet, clutching her woven tote bag. Her serene smile was beginning to slip, revealing the panic underneath. Wait, Andre, she said, her voice losing its breathy spiritual tone. You told me you owned that car. You said it was paid off. Before Andre could scramble to formulate a lie, his phone erupted with a loud gospel ringtone. He yanked it out of his pocket, looking relieved for the distraction, but his face immediately drained of whatever color it had left. It was his mother, Brenda. Brenda was the self-proclaimed First Lady of Greater Faith Fellowship, a local megachurch, where she paraded around every Sunday in custom-tailored suits and extravagant hats. She built her entire identity on being holier and wealthier than everyone else in the congregation. A lifestyle completely bankrolled by my auditing firm. Andre answered the phone, pressing it to his ear, but Brenda was screaming so loudly I could hear her from across the kitchen. He winced and fumbled with the screen, accidentally putting her on speakerphone. Andre! Marcus Davis! What is wrong with my card? Brenda shrieked, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. I am standing at the reception desk of the Serenity Springs Wellness Retreat. Sister Thomas and Sister Jenkins are right behind me. The cashier just told me my premium black card was declined. Declined, Andre. Do you know how humiliated I am? Andre swallowed hard, shooting me a panicked glare. Mom, calm down, there must be a bank error. I will call customer service right now. It is not a bank error, Brenda yelled. The cashier said the account was frozen by the primary cardholder. Put that cold, ungrateful wife of yours on the phone right this second. I know she is standing right there. I did not wait for Andre to hand me the phone. I leaned casually over the marble island, speaking directly into the speaker. Good morning, Brenda. The weather in Atlanta must be lovely for a spa day. You listen to me, you arrogant woman! Brenda snapped, her tone dripping with the self-righteous venom I had endured for 8 years. You turned my card back on immediately. How dare you embarrass me in front of my church circle? My son gave you the best years of his life. He sacrificed his youth to tolerate you sitting behind a computer screen day and night. You have the personality of a brick wall, and he stayed with you out of the goodness of his heart. Providing for his mother is the least you can do to repay him for putting up with your dry, boring existence. Her words hung in the air, exactly the same toxic garbage she had been feeding Andre since the day we got married. They both truly believed that my financial success was a communal family resource, meant to compensate them for having to deal with a black woman who chose boardrooms over baking and balance sheets over subservience. I let out a soft laugh, shaking my head. The free ride is officially over, Brenda, I said, making sure my voice carried crisp and clear through the phone. I am no longer funding your fake high society lifestyle. What are you talking about? Brenda gasped, her voice dripping with fake piety. I am the mother of your husband. You owe me respect. I owe you absolutely nothing, I replied. But you owe the spa $5,000 for this month's treatments. And since Andre just announced he is divorcing me for a much younger, much purer woman who despises material wealth, you should probably ask her to cover your tab. Her name is Brooke, by the way. She is standing right here in my kitchen, wearing gym clothes and holding hands with your son. Maybe she can pay for your mud wraps and deep tissue massages with good vibes and positive energy. Have a blessed day, Brenda. I reached over and tapped the red button on Andre's screen, disconnecting the call. The silence that fell over the kitchen was deafening. Brooke's eyes were darting rapidly around the room, taking in the marble countertops, the custom cabinetry, and finally settling on Andre. The realization was hitting her like a freight train. She was looking at the man she thought was her wealthy, successful savior, and finally seeing him for what he really was. A parasite who had been wearing my success like a designer suit. Andre, you told me your mother was independently wealthy, Brooke said, her voice trembling slightly. You said your family had generational money. You said Renee was just a stingy accountant who tried to control your assets. Andre held up his hands, palms facing outward, adopting a placating tone. Baby, listen to me. She is just being spiteful because she is heartbroken. I have money, I promise. We are going to take her to court and get exactly what we deserve. Half of everything in this house is mine. We will be fine. Brooke did not look convinced. She took a slow, deliberate step away from him, her eyes locked on the tow truck that was now pulling out of my driveway with the Porsche secured on the back. But before Brooke could demand an explanation or run for the hills, the heavy oak front door was shoved open with aggressive force. High heels clicked rapidly against the hardwood floors of the foyer, accompanied by the heavy thud of men's dress shoes. Voices echoed down the hallway, familiar and dripping with entitlement. I swear to God, if Renee is trying to play some kind of financial power trip, I will ruin her, a woman's voice shrieked. It was Alicia, Andre's younger sister. Following closely behind her was her husband, Kyle. Kyle was a junior wealth manager who loved throwing around Wall Street jargon to sound important. He was the kind of mediocre white man who thought marrying into a successful black family gave him a free pass to act like he owned our entire culture and our bank accounts. Alicia stormed into the kitchen, her designer sunglasses pushed up onto her forehead, clutching her own useless platinum card. Kyle flanked her, carrying a thick printed spreadsheet and a look of absolute arrogance. The entire parasite family had finally arrived for the feast. Alicia marched right up to the marble island, her designer handbag swinging aggressively against her hip. She pointed a French manicured finger just inches from my face, ready to launch into one of her famous temper tantrums, but her husband Kyle put a heavy hand on her shoulder. Let me handle this, babe, he said, his voice dripping with that unbearable frat boy arrogance he carried everywhere. Kyle fancied himself the Wolf of Wall Street just because he worked as a junior wealth manager at a mid-tier firm downtown. He always wore suits that were tailored a little too tight and spoke to women like we were slow children who needed the world translated for us. He stepped in front of Alicia, puffing out his chest, and threw a thick stapled spreadsheet down onto the counter right over my morning newspaper. The paper hit the marble with a loud thud meant to intimidate me. I barely blinked. I just took another sip of my espresso, letting the silence stretch. Kyle leaned over the counter, bracing his weight on his knuckles, trying to physically loom over me. "Let us drop the petty games, Renee," he said using his best authoritative corporate voice. "You are mad. We get it. Andre broke your heart, and your pride is hurting, but you do not want to go to war with us. I ran the numbers this morning as soon as Andre told me he was filing the papers. I know exactly what your little company is worth." I raised an eyebrow, gesturing for him to continue. I was fascinated to hear exactly how wrong he was. Kyle tapped the spreadsheet confidently. "Your fintech auditing firm was established exactly 3 years after you and Andre stood at the altar. According to the marital asset laws in this state that makes your business joint property, every algorithm you coded, every client you secured, every dollar of valuation is 50% his. Now I ran the comps on similar boutique accounting firms in the Atlanta area. On your best day, your little operation might be worth $2 million, which means my brother-in-law is walking away with a cool $1 million plus half the equity in this house." I looked at Andre, who was standing behind Kyle, puffing his chest out, looking incredibly pleased with himself. He actually believed Kyle. He actually thought he was about to become a millionaire. It was almost sad how little they knew about what I actually did all day. They thought I was just crunching numbers for local bakeries and car dealerships. They had no idea I held the auditing contracts for 3 of the largest supply chain conglomerates on the eastern seaboard. "You are making a huge mistake," Kyle continued, leaning closer, his breath smelling of stale peppermint gum and cheap coffee. "You think canceling a few credit cards makes you powerful. It just makes you look bitter. We have aggressive lawyers ready to move on this today. If you try to fight us, we will drag you through the mud. We will audit every single penny you have ever made." He pointed a finger at the divorce papers still sitting on the counter. "Listen, Renee, you are just a glorified accountant. I do this for a living. Sign the house and half the cash over, or my firm will freeze your assets by Friday. Do not make me ruin you." I looked at the spreadsheet he had thrown on my counter. It was hilarious. He had used a basic online business valuation calculator, the kind you find on the second page of a search engine. It was completely useless. I remembered Thanksgiving 3 years ago when Kyle first joined the family. I had been working on a complex compliance algorithm in the living room, and he had leaned over my shoulder, chuckling and telling me that women always overcomplicate simple math. I did not correct him then, and I was certainly not going to correct him now. "Kyle," I said, my voice soft and perfectly calm, "do you actually believe that your mid-level wealth management firm has the jurisdictional authority to freeze the assets of a privately held corporation without a court order or a federal mandate? Because if you do, you are not just a terrible financial advisor. You are dangerously incompetent." Kyle's face flushed a deep, angry red. His jaw clenched as he tried to formulate a comeback that sounded legally accurate, but before he could speak, the atmosphere in the room violently shifted. Brooke, the spiritual wellness coach, who had been standing silently near the hallway, was beginning to panic. The entire morning was crumbling around her. She had walked into this house believing she was the beautiful young prize, claiming her wealthy, older king. Instead, she had watched his luxury car get towed by my company. She had listened to his mother scream about declined credit cards and fraudulent lifestyles over speakerphone. And now she was watching his family threaten me with asset freezing and drawn-out legal wars. This was not the peaceful, affluent, soft life Andre had promised her. This was a financial war zone. Brooke started backing away toward the front door, her eyes darting nervously around the room. She was practically hyperventilating, her woven tote bag clutched against her chest like a shield. She just wanted to escape the crossfire. But in her frantic attempt to put distance between herself and the screaming, she misjudged the space in the grand foyer. She backed directly into a heavy mahogany pedestal. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion. The pedestal wobbled. Brooke gasped and spun around, reaching out her hands to catch the object resting on top. But her yoga reflexes were not fast enough. The authentic Ming Dynasty vase, An antique I had purchased at an exclusive auction in London plummeted toward the hardwood floor. The crash was deafening. The priceless blue and white porcelain shattered into thousands of jagged pieces, echoing through the foyer like a gunshot. The shouting in the kitchen stopped instantly. Andre, Kyle, and Alicia all whipped their heads around, staring in absolute horror at the destruction on the floor. Brooke stood frozen, her hands covering her mouth, her eyes wide with sheer terror. She looked like a child who had just set the house on fire. I did not raise my voice. I did not gasp. I slowly picked up my espresso mug, took a final sip, and walked out from behind the marble island. My heels clicked softly against the hardwood as I approached the disaster zone. I looked down at the shattered porcelain, then slowly lifted my gaze to meet Brooke's terrified eyes. That vase was worth $45,000. I said, my voice carrying a freezing, chilling calm that made the air in the room drop 10 degrees. And since you are holding Andre's hand, I assume you are paying for it. Brooke let out a high-pitched sob. Her face crumpled completely, her spiritual facade completely destroyed by the crushing weight of reality. Without saying a single word to Andre, she turned on her heel, shoved the heavy front door open, and ran down the driveway crying hysterically, leaving her so-called true love standing in the middle of my foyer, surrounded by broken porcelain and his own collapsing lies. The silence in the foyer was broken only by the sound of Brooke fleeing down the driveway. Andre stood paralyzed. His eyes darted between the shattered blue and white porcelain at his feet and the open front door. Alicia broke the silence first. She let out an exaggerated sigh and examined the bottom of her designer heels, complaining loudly that the dust from the broken vase was ruining her shoes. Andre finally snapped out of his shock. His face twisted from embarrassment into pure, unadulterated rage. He pointed a finger at me, and his voice shook with a mix of anger and desperation. "You have gone too far, Renee," he said. "You think you can just bully people because you have a little money. You humiliated the woman I love in my own house. I will not stand for this disrespect under my own roof." Kyle crossed his arms and leaned against the entryway arch. "He is right, Renee," Kyle said. "You are acting completely unhinged. You cannot just kick his girlfriend out and destroy his property. This is a marital residence. Andre has rights." Andre nodded vigorously, emboldened by the Wall Street confidence radiating from Kyle. "That is exactly right," Andre said. "This is my house too. My name is on the mailbox. My clothes are in the master bedroom closet. I am the man of this house, and I am not leaving. I am calling the police right now to have you removed. You are mentally unstable and creating a hostile living environment. I want you out of here before I get back from brunch." He pulled his phone out of his pocket, his thumb hovering over the screen. He looked at me expectantly, as if waiting for me to break down and beg him not to call the authorities. I did not move a muscle. I simply looked past him through the open front door and watched a sleek black sedan pull into the driveway. It smoothly avoided the spot where the tow truck had just hauled away the leased Porsche. The car door opened and David stepped out. David was my executive assistant, a man of few words who was always impeccably dressed in a dark suit. He moved with a quiet, lethal efficiency that made most people instantly nervous. He walked up the front steps, stepping carefully over the shattered remains of the Ming vase without even glancing down at it. Tucked securely under his arm was a sleek black leather folder. "Good morning, Renee," David said. His voice was a low, calm rumble that contrasted sharply with the hysterical energy Andre and his family had brought into my home. "The perimeter has been secured. The locksmiths will be here in 20 minutes to complete the hardware transition." Andre scoffed loudly, putting his phone down for a second to glare at David. "Are you deaf, man?" Andre asked. "I just said this is my house. You are not changing any locks. If you touch my doors, I am having you arrested for trespassing. This is a marital asset." "Kyle, tell him." Kyle puffed out his chest and stepped toward David. "Listen, buddy," Kyle said. "You are participating in an illegal eviction. As the financial advisor and brother-in-law of Andre, I am telling you to step down. You are messing with marital property laws." David did not even blink. He did not look at Kyle. He turned his gaze to me, waiting for my instruction. I gave him a slight nod. David opened the black leather folder and pulled out a crisp, notarized legal document. He extended it directly toward Andre. Andre hesitated, looking at the paper as if it were coated in poison before snatching it out of the hand of my assistant. "What is this garbage?" he muttered, scanning the top paragraph. I took a step forward, closing the distance between us. "That is the property deed, Andre," I said. "I suggest you read it very carefully, paying special attention to the ownership entity listed on page 2. Andre frowned as his eyes scanned the dense legal text. His lips moved silently as he read the words. Kyle snatched the document from the hands of Andre to read it himself. Within seconds, the smug, superior expression on the face of Kyle completely evaporated. He swallowed hard, and his eyes widened behind his expensive frames. "Renee, what is this?" Kyle asked, his voice suddenly lacking all of its previous authority. "This says the property is owned by the Eleanor Sterling Irrevocable Blind Trust." I smiled and felt a deep wave of satisfaction wash over me. "That is correct, Kyle," I said. "For someone who claims to understand wealth management, you certainly failed to do your due diligence on my family background." My late grandmother Eleanor was a very smart woman. She knew that sudden wealth could attract parasites. So long before Andre and I ever met, she established an irrevocable blind trust. That trust purchased this house and the surrounding estate in full. It pays the property taxes, it covers the maintenance, and it holds the exclusive deed. I turned my attention back to Andre, who was staring at me with a blank, uncomprehending look. "I never put your name on the deed, Andre," I said. "I never even put my own name on the deed. This house has never been a marital asset because neither of us actually owns it. The trust owns it. I am simply listed as the primary beneficiary with lifetime residency rights." Andre shook his head, and his face twisted into an ugly scowl. "That is a lie," he said. "I live here. I receive mail here. I am legally a tenant. You cannot just throw me out on the street without a formal 30-day eviction notice. The police will laugh in your face." David stepped forward seamlessly, pulling a second document from the folder. "Actually, sir, you are not a tenant," David said. "According to the documents you signed when you moved in, which were disguised as standard insurance liability waivers, you are classified as a registered guest of the primary beneficiary." I watched the realization hit Andre like a physical blow. A registered guest. "That is right," I said, keeping my tone light and conversational. "And as the primary beneficiary, I have the absolute right to revoke your guest privileges at any time without notice, effective immediately. You have exactly 10 minutes to go upstairs, gather whatever cheap underwear and cologne you can fit into a garbage bag, and vacate the premises. If you are still standing on this hardwood floor when the 10 minutes are up, David will have you escorted out for criminal trespassing." Alicia let out a loud, dramatic gasp and clutched the arm of her husband. "Kyle, do something," she said. "Tell her she cannot do this. It is illegal." But Kyle was silent. He was staring at the trust documents in his hands, completely defeated. He knew the law well enough to know that an irrevocable blind trust was an ironclad fortress. He could not touch it, and neither could Andre. Andre looked around the room, realizing his grand plan of taking half my house had just evaporated into thin air. His breathing grew heavy, and his chest heaved with barely contained fury. He realized he had been outplayed on every level, but his fragile male ego refused to let him surrender gracefully. He needed to prove he still had power. "Fine," Andre spat, and his voice was laced with venom. "Keep the damn house, Renee. I do not want this sterile museum anyway. I will buy my own house. I will buy a better house for Brooke." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone again, tapping the screen aggressively. "You think you left me with nothing," he said. "You forgot about our joint savings account. The account I have been depositing my paychecks into for years. There is $200,000 sitting in there right now. I am transferring every single penny to my private account to pay for my shark lawyers. I am going to bleed your little company dry in divorce court. You are going to pay for humiliating me." He held the phone up so I could see the screen, demonstrating his ultimate power move. He navigated to the banking app, typed in the full $200,000 amount, and aggressively tapped the transfer button. He looked at me, waiting for me to beg, waiting for the panic to set in. But I just stood there watching the screen of his phone. A small spinning circle appeared for a brief second, then the screen flashed a bright, harsh color. A bold, capitalized message popped up across the display. Fatal error, transaction denied, insufficient funds. Andre stared at his phone. The screen was bright and the text was undeniable. Fatal error, transaction denied, insufficient funds. He began to tap the screen again and again. His thumb hammered the glass of his smartphone with frantic, desperate strikes. He closed the banking application and reopened it. He typed his password with trembling fingers. He swiped down to refresh the page over and over again, but the stark black numbers on the screen refused to change. The balance of our joint savings account, the one he had just arrogantly claimed would fund his legal war against me, sat at exactly $0.00. "Where is it?" he screamed, his voice cracking as he shoved the phone toward my face. "Where is my money, Renee? You transferred it. You hid it in an offshore account. You cannot do this. That is my money. I earned that money." He was practically spitting with rage, his polished gentleman facade entirely replaced by the frantic panic of a cornered animal. He looked toward the hallway where Brooke had just vanished, but he was too obsessed with the empty bank account to even care that his young new soulmate had abandoned him to face the wreckage alone. Kyle saw his opportunity to play the hero once more. He adjusted his unnecessarily tight tie and stepped between Andre and me, pointing an accusatory finger right at my chest. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life, Renee," Kyle said, his voice dripping with condescending triumph. "Draining a joint marital account during a pending divorce is illegal. It is a federal crime. It is asset hiding and financial fraud. Judges absolutely destroy spouses who try to pull this stunt. Not only will the court force you to return every single penny of that $200,000, but you will likely face jail time. I am calling my firm right now to report this transaction and have you investigated by the authorities." I let him finish his little speech. It was genuinely amusing to watch a junior wealth manager pretend to be a seasoned litigator. I turned to David, who was still standing quietly by the marble island, completely unfazed by the screaming men in the room. David reached into his sleek black folder and handed me a single crisp sheet of paper. I took the paper and slid it across the counter toward Kyle, stopping right over his useless business valuation spreadsheet. I did not hide a single dime. I said, my voice steady and resonant in the quiet kitchen. I paid a legitimate registered corporate debt. Kyle snatched the paper off the counter, his eyes scanning the lines of text. Andre leaned over his shoulder, his face pale and sweating profusely. "For the past 4 years, Andre," I continued, "I have been receiving extremely interesting notices mixed in with the junk mail. It turns out you have been opening high-limit credit cards under the radar. You use them to fund your expensive lunches, your luxury wardrobe, those healing crystal retreats for Brooke and your mother, and her weekly spa treatments. You basically financed your entire fake millionaire lifestyle on plastic. You took out massive loans to look rich for a 26-year-old girl. And because you are arrogant and careless, you tied every single one of those accounts to the address of this estate." Andre opened his mouth to deny it, but no words came out. The proof was right there in the hands of Kyle. He had racked up exactly $200,000 in hidden debt across multiple high-interest credit cards. The creditors were beginning to circle, and since you tied that massive debt to this address, I explained the collection agencies were threatening to put a lien on the property. My grandmother and her blind trust have a strict zero liability clause. The trust cannot carry unsecured debt. It goes against the foundational bylaws of the estate. So to protect the property from your absolute financial incompetence, I was legally obligated to clear the balance. I took a slow breath, letting the reality of the situation sink into their thick skulls. I used the funds in our joint savings account, the account that was funded 95% by my auditing firm deposits, by the way, to completely pay off your personal credit card debt. You are completely debt-free, Andre. You should be thanking me. I just saved you from bankruptcy. But you also have absolutely zero cash. Kyle dropped the paper onto the counter as if it were on fire. He backed away from Andre, running a hand through his gelled hair. He knew exactly what this meant. I had not hidden marital assets. I had paid off a legitimate marital debt before the divorce papers were ever formally filed by a judge. It was a flawless legal maneuver and completely untraceable as fraud. The money was gone to the banks, not to a hidden account. "You are broke, Andre." Kyle muttered, his corporate bravado entirely deflated. "You literally have nothing. The account is empty and you do not have a claim to the house. You have zero leverage." Alicia turned on her brother, her face twisted in absolute disgust. "You told us you had this handled, Andre," she shrieked, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You told us you were taking half of everything. You made us drive all the way down here to back you up, and you do not even have $1 to your name. We look like fools because of you. You are an embarrassment." Andre sank onto one of the velvet bar stools, burying his face in his hands. He had lost his leased sports car. He had lost his young spiritual girlfriend. He had lost his claim to the mansion. And now he had lost the massive pile of cash he thought would secure his future. The reality of his situation was crashing down on him. He was a middle-aged man with no real assets, no savings, and a family that was quickly turning against him. He was staring down the barrel of a life where he actually had to work for his money. Kyle shook his head and pulled out his phone. "We are leaving, Alicia," Kyle said, adjusting his suit jacket. "There is no money here to manage. I am not wasting my weekends standing in a kitchen watching a broke man cry. Come on, let us go." He turned toward the front door, ready to abandon his brother-in-law without a single second thought. But just as Kyle took his first step toward the foyer, the piercing wail of a heavy siren shattered the morning air. The sound grew deafeningly loud, echoing off the neighboring houses and vibrating through the floorboards. Flashing red and white lights painted the front windows of the living room, reflecting off the shattered Ming vase on the floor. We all turned our heads as a massive ambulance violently backed up the long driveway, crushing the pristine flower beds near the entrance. The back doors of the ambulance swung open, and 2 paramedics rushed out. They pulled a wheeled stretcher down onto the driveway. Lying on the stretcher was Brenda. She was clutching her chest with both hands, her face contorted in a mask of sheer agony. Her large, custom-tailored church hat was sitting crooked on her head, and she was waving her arms wildly. She was screaming at the top of her lungs, demanding to be brought inside the house immediately. "My heart. Andre. My heart." Brenda wailed, her voice carrying easily through the open front door. "The stress of this wicked woman is killing me. Get me inside. I need to be in my son and his house. I cannot breathe out here." It was the most pathetic, transparent performance I had ever seen. Brenda had clearly faked a medical emergency right at the reception desk of the wellness retreat. She knew the credit cards were cut off, and she knew Andre was losing his grip. So she orchestrated a massive dramatic scene just to force her way into my home and manipulate me into letting them stay. The paramedics were professionals, but even they looked thoroughly unimpressed with the theatrical performance Brenda was putting on in my driveway. Standard medical protocol dictated they transport her anyway, so they loaded her onto the ambulance, while she continued to wail about her heart. Andre, Kyle, and Alicia scrambled into their respective cars, following the flashing lights down the street, like loyal subjects trailing a queen. I did not rush. I had David calmly pull my sedan out of the garage. As we coasted down the long, private road leading out of my gated community, we spotted a familiar figure. Brooke was sitting on her woven tote bag near the security gates. She was frantically tapping her phone screen, trying to get a rideshare service to venture out to the suburbs. I told David to pull over. I rolled down the window and offered Brooke a ride to the hospital to support her soulmate in his time of need. She looked at me with absolute dread, but she was stranded. She reluctantly climbed into the back seat, sitting as far away from me as possible. The scene at St. Jude Private Medical Pavilion was exactly what I expected. Andre had bypassed the standard emergency room and demanded his mother be placed in the VIP cardiac wing. It was an out-of-network luxury facility that catered to the ultra-wealthy. The suite had mahogany doors, plush carpets, and a private catering menu. When David, Brooke, and I walked into the expansive suite, Brenda was lying in a motorized bed. She was hooked up to a few superficial monitors wearing a hospital gown, but she had absolutely refused to remove her expensive pearl necklace. She was currently holding court complaining loudly to the attending physician and a stern-looking hospital administrator holding a thick clipboard. "My wealthy daughter-in-law is on her way to handle all of this," Brenda proclaimed, her voice surprisingly strong for a woman claiming to be on the verge of cardiac arrest. "She manages all of my premium medical expenses, doctor. The terrible stress she put me under this morning caused this entire episode. She owes me the best care available." Andre stood by the bed holding the hand of his mother. He looked up as I entered the room and his eyes immediately darted to Brooke. He let go of Brenda and took a step toward his young girlfriend, ready to play the comforting protector. But Brooke flinched, stepping backward and wrapping her arms tightly around her own waist. Brenda spotted me and instantly adjusted her performance. She clutched her chest and let out a weak, breathy groan, letting her head loll back against the pillows. "Oh, Renee," Brenda rasped, laying the guilt trip on incredibly thick. "You nearly killed me today. I hope you are satisfied with yourself. You need to make this right. Tell this nice administrator that you are taking care of the deposit for this VIP suite. It is the absolute least you can do after the emotional trauma you inflicted on this family." The hospital administrator smoothed her gray suit and stepped forward. She looked at me with a tight professional smile. "Mrs. Davis, we require a premium credit card on file for the VIP suite and the specialized out-of-network cardiac evaluations. The preliminary hold for the room and the testing is $25,000. I looked at Brenda resting against her fluffy pillows. Then I looked at Andre, who was staring at me with a mixture of defiance and sheer panic. Finally, I turned my attention back to the hospital administrator. "Oh, I am not the financial guarantor for this patient," I said, my voice dripping with polite professionalism. "I am currently filing for divorce from her son. But do not worry, Andre has already moved on to his true soulmate. And since family takes care of family, his future wife has graciously agreed to cover all of these premium medical expenses." Before anyone could process what I was saying, I stepped aside and smoothly pushed Brooke to the front of the room. Brooke stumbled slightly, her woven tote bag slipping off her shoulder and hitting the floor. She looked around the VIP suite like a trapped animal. "This is Brooke," I announced to the room, making sure my voice was loud and clear. "She is a spiritual wellness coach who firmly believes in the power of giving and positive energy. She is fully prepared to take over the financial responsibilities of the Davis matriarch. Please hand her the billing forms." Andre opened his mouth to object, but he had absolutely no money to his name, and he knew it. He could not offer his own card without embarrassing himself in front of the hospital staff. He looked at Brooke with a forced, encouraging smile, hoping she would somehow play along and save his pride. The hospital administrator did not miss a beat. She extended the heavy silver clipboard and a pen directly toward Brooke. "If you could just sign here at the bottom," the administrator said smoothly. "We will also need you to provide your social security number so we can run a standard credit check to secure the remaining balance for the ongoing treatments." Brooke stared at the clipboard as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. The serene, positive energy facade she had been maintaining all morning cracked completely. She was no longer the peaceful yoga instructor floating above the material world. She was a terrified, desperate woman cornered in a hospital room. Her breathing hitched and she backed away, bumping hard into the wall of the suite. She looked at the administrator, then at the clipboard, and finally locked her wide, terrified eyes on Andre. "I cannot sign that," Brooke yelled, her voice cracking and bordering on completely hysterical. Andre took a step toward her, holding his hands up to calm her down. "Baby, it is just a standard form," he pleaded, his voice thick with desperation. "Just put your information down so they can treat my mother. I will figure the money out later, I promise." Brooke shook her head violently, her blonde hair flying around her face. She glared at Andre, completely abandoning her sweet, innocent persona. "You do not understand anything," she screamed, stepping away from his reaching hands. "I cannot sign those financial forms. I cannot give them my social security number, Andre. If they run my credit profile, they will see the active federal fraud investigation." The entire room went dead silent. The heart monitor next to the bed beeped steadily in the quiet room, but nobody moved. Brenda froze in the middle of a fake cough. Kyle and Alicia, who had just walked into the room, stopped dead in their tracks. Andre stared at his beautiful young savior, his mouth hanging slightly open as the crushing weight of her words finally registered. I walked out of that hospital suite, leaving the entire Davis family suffocating in the dead silence of their own making. I did not look back. The drive from the hospital to my downtown corporate headquarters was incredibly peaceful. By the time I arrived at my corner office, the morning sun was high, pouring through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows. The polished walnut desk and the quiet hum of the city below offered the perfect sanctuary from the pathetic circus I had just escaped. David walked into my office right on schedule. He locked the heavy glass door behind him and approached my desk. Most people thought David was simply an overly efficient executive assistant. They did not know he had spent 15 years as a forensic investigator for a massive corporate insurance firm before I recruited him. He had a natural talent for finding the absolute worst secrets in people and documenting them perfectly. He placed a thick manila folder onto the center of my desk. "The preliminary background check on Brooke is complete," he said, his voice a low, even rumble. "The spiritual wellness persona is a complete fabrication. She is not a grounded, earthy healer, Renee. She is a highly calculated financial grifter." I opened the folder. The first page was a printed timeline of financial transactions, bank records, and legal notices. I scanned the documents, feeling a grim sense of satisfaction. Brooke had built an entire brand around being anti-materialistic and rejecting corporate greed. In reality, she was drowning in a spectacular amount of federal debt and living far beyond her means. Before David could break down the exact numbers, the heavy glass door of my office rattled violently. My receptionist let out a startled gasp in the hallway. A second later, the door was shoved open with brute force. Andre stood in the doorway, breathing heavily. His tailored suit jacket was wrinkled, and his silk tie was pulled loose. He looked like a man who had spent the last 2 hours running from a waking nightmare. He marched into my office, completely ignoring David. "You need to fix this right now," Andre demanded, slamming his fist onto the smooth wood of my desk. "The hospital administration just threatened to physically discharge my mother. They ran a preliminary check on my profile and flagged me as a massive credit risk because of the zero balance in our joint account. You have to call them and authorize a wire transfer, Renee. You cannot just leave her lying in a hospital bed without care." I leaned back in my leather executive chair. I folded my hands together and looked up at him. "Your mother is currently experiencing acid reflux and a severe case of embarrassment," I said calmly. "She is not dying, Andre. And even if she were, I am no longer funding the Davis family luxury medical plan. You brought your spiritual soulmate to the hospital to save the day. Why did she not just manifest the $25,000 for you using her healing crystals?" Andre flushed a deep, angry red. His hands gripped the edge of my desk until his knuckles turned white. "Do not bring Brooke into this," he snapped. "She is just overwhelmed by the drama. She has some complicated tax issues right now that she needs to sort out privately. You are just trying to deflect from the fact that you stole my money and ruined my morning." I let out a soft laugh. "Complicated tax issues is a very polite way to describe a massive federal felony," I replied. I picked up the first stack of papers from the manila folder and dropped them right in front of him. I read the top document aloud, making sure every single word hit him squarely in the chest. "Brooke currently has an active federal warrant out of the state of Florida. During the height of the pandemic, your anti-materialistic wellness coach applied for and received exactly $150,000 in Paycheck Protection Program loans." Andre stared at the paperwork, his eyes darting across the highlighted paragraphs. I continued reading, my voice steady and relentless. "She claimed the money was to pay the staff of her wellness studio. But David pulled the corporate filings and the tax returns. She did not have a staff. The studio was a completely fake front company registered to a strip mall. She used the entire $150,000 to pay off 2 luxury car leases, a mountain of credit card debt, and a 6-month rental on a beachfront condo in Miami. She has been dodging federal investigators for over a year." I picked up a glossy photograph from the folder and tossed it onto the pile. It showed Brooke stepping out of a white Range Rover wearing designer sunglasses and carrying bags from high-end retail boutiques. "This is your pure, innocent soulmate, Andre," I said. "She did not fall in love with your sparkling personality. She targeted you because you drove a leased Porsche and wore a wedding ring paid for by my auditing firm. She thought you were a rich mark who could pay off her federal restitution before the government seized her remaining assets. You two are a match made in heaven, two broke parasites trying to feed off each other to survive." Andre stared at the photograph of Brooke, his mouth opened and closed. The reality of his situation was completely unavoidable. He had thrown away a secure, wealthy life for a younger woman who was literally using him to escape a federal prison sentence. I watched his shoulders slump. I waited for the inevitable apology for the moment his pride finally broke and he begged for a second chance. But Andre was utterly incapable of genuine humility. His fragile male ego simply could not handle being defeated by a woman he viewed as boring. He slowly pushed himself away from my desk. The shock on his face melted away, replaced by a cold, calculating sneer. He let out a dark, bitter laugh and straightened his posture, adjusting his wrinkled suit. "You think you have everything figured out, Renee," he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing pitch. "You think because you have a fancy investigator and a marble kitchen that you hold all the cards. You think you can just discard me and leave me with absolutely nothing." He reached into the pocket of his suit trousers. He pulled out a small silver flash drive and held it up between his thumb and forefinger. The metallic casing caught the light streaming through the windows. "I watched you work from home for 3 years," Andre said, a wicked smile spreading across his face. "I watched you leave your laptop open on the kitchen counter while you poured your expensive espresso. You were so confident, so secure in your little auditing empire. You never even noticed when I plugged this drive into your corporate server access portal." David shifted slightly, his posture growing tense, but I held up a hand to stop him. I kept my eyes locked on the flash drive. "What exactly do you think you have, Andre?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "I have your entire firm confidential client list," he said, his smile widening into a triumphant grin. "I have the private financial data of those 3 massive supply chain conglomerates you brag about. I have their proprietary algorithms, their audit histories, and their unreleased quarterly projections. I downloaded everything last night while you were sleeping, right before I told you I was leaving." He tossed the flash drive into the air and caught it smoothly in his palm. "I know exactly what your biggest competitor downtown would pay for this information," Andre continued. "They would destroy your firm by Friday. They would steal every single one of your massive contracts and ruin your reputation in the industry. So here is my counteroffer, Renee. You are going to wire exactly $5 million into a secure offshore account by tomorrow morning. You pay me $5 million to walk away, or I sell this drive to your rival and watch your entire life burn to the ground." Andre stared at the screen, completely paralyzed. "What is this?" he stammered, his voice dropping to a panicked whisper. I watched the files transfer. I saw the client names. Marcus shook his head, his expression shifting from amusement to absolute disgust. "You really are an idiot," Andre Marcus said. "Did you actually think a woman who builds forensic auditing software would leave her home network vulnerable? That is a honeypot trap. It is a fake encrypted server designed to look like a confidential database. The second you plugged that drive into her network, you triggered a silent alarm." The truth was, I had known about the wandering eyes of my husband for a very long time. Months ago, when I first suspected Andre was having an affair, I had David secure my entire life. David used his forensic background to install tracking software and decoy servers on every single device connected to our home estate. We created the honeypot trap specifically for Andre, knowing his greed and his stupidity would eventually lead him to try and steal from me. Kyle backed away from the desk, his face draining of all color. He looked like he was about to vomit. The SEC Kyle muttered, his breathing becoming rapid and shallow. "If she logged a security breach, she has proof of corporate espionage. We are finished. My licensing board will destroy me." Marcus Vance ignored the panic attack happening in front of him. He picked up his personal cell phone from the desk and tapped a contact name. He pressed the speaker button and set the phone down next to the laptop. The line rang twice before a familiar voice echoed through the executive office. "Hello, Marcus." My voice sounded crisp and perfectly calm through the speaker. Renee Marcus said, a genuine smile returning to his face. "Yeah, your idiot husband and his brother-in-law are standing in my office right now. They just tried to sell me the dummy files from your honeypot trap. They actually asked for $5 million. I let out a soft laugh on the other end of the line. "I told you they were arrogant, Marcus," I said. "I appreciate you taking the meeting." "Anytime," Renee Marcus replied. "Now what do you want me to do with them? Do you want me to call the police, or should I just go straight to the SEC? Kyle turned sheet white, his knees buckling as he grabbed the edge of a leather chair to keep from collapsing onto the floor. Kyle practically dragged Andre out of the executive suite of Marcus Vance. He was hyperventilating his expensive leather shoes, slipping on the polished marble floors of the hallway. He shoved Andre into the elevator and slammed his hand against the lobby button. "You complete idiot," Kyle hissed, his voice trembling with sheer terror. "You just handed them a federal corporate espionage case on a silver platter. Do you understand what the Securities and Exchange Commission will do to me? They will strip my financial licenses. They will seize my assets. I will be wearing a bright orange jumpsuit in a federal penitentiary by the end of the month." Andre just stared blindly at the elevator doors, the reality of his massive failure finally crushing his inflated ego. But Kyle was not ready to surrender his entire life over the stupidity of his brother-in-law. Desperation is a powerful motivator. Kyle knew that the only way to save himself from federal prison was to find a piece of leverage so massive that it would force me to drop the espionage charges completely. For the next 72 hours, Kyle locked himself in the guest bedroom of his house. He did not sleep. He barely ate. He pulled every single public record tax filing and corporate registry document tied to my auditing firm. He scoured through hundreds of pages of dense legal jargon, looking for a single crack in my armor. He was looking for anything he could weaponize to save his own skin. On the morning of the fourth day, Kyle found it. He drove straight to the cheap budget motel where Andre had been forced to stay after I evicted him. Kyle kicked the door open, waving a stack of highlighted papers in the air. His eyes were bloodshot, and his suit was heavily wrinkled, but a manic, triumphant smile stretched across his face. "We have her," Kyle announced, slapping the papers onto the cheap laminate desk. "We absolutely have her, Andre. She made a mistake." Andre sat up on the lumpy mattress, rubbing his face. "What are you talking about?" Andre asked. Kyle pointed frantically at a specific line on a corporate restructuring document dated exactly 5 years ago. When Renee transferred the primary ownership of her auditing firm under her new holding company, she missed a signature. Kyle explained, his voice vibrating with excitement. "It is a fatal flaw in her corporate structuring. Her legal team filed the documents, but the primary authorization line on page 42 was never physically signed. It is a blank line, Andre." Andre stared at the paper, not fully grasping the concept. "So what if she missed a signature?" he asked. "It means her corporate shield is completely invalid," Kyle said, grabbing Andre by the shoulders. "The irrevocable blind trust protected the house, but her business is exposed. Because the holding company transfer is technically incomplete, that $100 million auditing firm is not fully protected from marital asset laws. It pierces the corporate veil entirely. The business is fully exposed to a 50-50 split in divorce court. We can take half of her entire company." The realization hit Andre like a physical blow. $50 million. His eyes widened, and his posture instantly transformed from a defeated motel resident back into an arrogant, entitled king. He snatched the papers from Kyle, a wicked smile spreading across his face. They did not waste a single second. Kyle used his remaining professional connections to hire the most aggressive, sleazy litigation attorney he could find on a pure contingency basis. They formally filed a massive lawsuit against me, demanding $50 million, a complete freeze on my corporate assets, and a permanent injunction against any criminal espionage charges being filed against them. I was sitting at my desk when the process server arrived. David walked into my office and handed me the thick stack of legal summons. I read through the aggressive demands and the desperate legal theories Kyle had cobbled together. I knew exactly what I needed to do next. I picked up my cell phone and called my lead corporate counsel. I made sure to pace around my office, making my footsteps loud and erratic. I put on the absolute best performance of my entire life. I let my voice tremble. I forced my breathing to sound shallow and panicked. I practically begged my lawyer through the phone, knowing exactly how the legal game was played. They found the missing signature. I said, my voice cracking with manufactured distress. They're going to take half my company. You have to stop them. Please just agree to an early mediation. Tell their lawyers whatever they want to hear. Just get them to the table before they go to the press with this. I cannot lose $50 million. Please just make it stop. My lawyer, who was fully aware of my actual strategy, played his part perfectly on his end, knowing that opposing counsel would relay every ounce of my supposed terror directly to Kyle and Andre. And they certainly did. When the litigation attorney called Andre to report that the Ice Queen had finally broken, that I was terrified, and desperately begging for immediate mediation, Andre felt like he had conquered the entire world. He had won. He was about to be a 50 millionaire. The celebration began immediately. Andre and Brooke decided they needed to reward themselves for their impending massive payday. Andre opened a brand new high-interest credit card under the assumption that he would easily pay it off by the end of the month. He booked 2 first-class tickets to Dubai for a luxury celebration vacation. He reserved a 5-star penthouse suite overlooking the ocean. They popped expensive champagne in their cheap motel room, toasting to my absolute downfall. The day of the early mediation arrived. The weather was bright and sunny, an arrogant reflection of the mood Andre and his team carried. They rented a luxury black car service to drive them to the downtown mediation center. Andre, Kyle, and Brooke strutted into the mahogany-paneled conference room like conquering royalty. Andre was wearing a brand new tailored suit he had bought on credit. Kyle had his chest puffed out, clutching his briefcase like it held the winning lottery ticket. They completely ignored my legal team and took their seats at the heavy wooden table. Brooke did not even bother to look up when I walked into the room. She was sitting right next to Andre, entirely abandoning her humble wellness persona. She was actively swiping on her expensive tablet, zooming in on bright, glossy pictures. She was casually browsing Zillow, searching for a $20 million mega mansion to buy with my money. The heavy oak doors of the downtown mediation center closed with a solid thud, sealing us inside the sprawling conference room. The mediator, a retired state judge with decades of experience sitting at the head of the massive table, cleared his throat to officially open the proceedings. Brooke did not even look up. She kept her manicured finger gliding across the screen of her tablet, swiping past pictures of indoor pools and 10-car garages. Andre sat beside her, radiating a toxic level of unearned confidence. He adjusted the cuffs of his brand new suit and gave a slight nod to his legal counsel. The lawyer Andre and Kyle had scraped together from the bottom of the contingency barrel was a man named Sterling. He wore a flashy pinstripe suit and carried himself with the aggressive bluster of a man who thought volume equated to legal authority. Sterling did not waste a single second with pleasantries. He opened his thick binder and immediately launched into a theatrical monologue about justice, fairness, and the sanctity of marital assets. Sterling announced that they were not here to negotiate pennies. His voice boomed off the mahogany walls as he declared they were here to secure what was rightfully owed to his client. He spun a ridiculous narrative claiming that for the entirety of this marriage, Andre had been the foundational pillar of support that allowed me to build my corporate auditing empire. Sterling insisted that because of the fatal flaw in the holding company structure, the business was a joint marital asset. He formally demanded a $50 million buyout, representing exactly 1/2 of the corporate valuation. Sterling did not stop there. He paced behind Andre, listing off demands like a greedy child. He demanded half the value of the residential estate, completely ignoring the reality of the blind trust. He demanded a complete transfer of the joint savings account that I had already drained to pay off the massive secret credit card debt Andre had accumulated. He even demanded the retention of all corporate country club memberships. Finally, he demanded a permanent ironclad order for lifelong spousal support, guaranteeing Andre a monthly stipend of $50,000 to maintain the standard of living he had grown accustomed to. Behind them, Kyle sat leaning forward in his chair with his arms crossed over his chest. Every few minutes, he would lean down and whisper directly into the ear of Andre. I could hear snippets of his arrogant financial advice carrying across the quiet room. Kyle was already instructing Andre on how they would liquidate the corporate assets. He whispered about capital gains tax shelters and how they would immediately fire my entire board of directors the second the ink was dry on the settlement. Kyle acted as if the $50 million was already sitting securely in his own bank account. I sat perfectly still on my side of the table. I was wearing a tailored beige suit, which was a deliberate choice. It was a neutral, unreadable color that offered them absolutely no indication of what I was thinking or feeling. My face was a carefully constructed mask of absolute calm. I did not interrupt Sterling. I did not object to his ridiculous characterization of our marriage. I simply let them talk. I sat there in silence for 20 agonizing minutes, listening to these three arrogant men detail exactly how they planned to dismantle the empire I had built with my own two hands. As Sterling continued to weave a fictional narrative about how Andre had sacrificed his own ambitions to support my dreams, my mind drifted back to the reality of those early years. I remembered the freezing, damp basement of our first rented house. I remembered sitting wrapped in heavy blankets, staring at the glowing monitor of my computer at 3 in the morning. I spent countless hours typing lines of forensic discrepancy algorithms until my fingers cramped. I remembered the smell of the damp earth and the constant annoying buzz of the single broken space heater that barely kept the room warm. While I was in that basement building the foundation of a $100 million software firm, Andre was never by my side. He was out at the bars every single weekend. I remembered him coming home hours before dawn, reeking of cheap alcohol and expensive cologne. I remembered him stumbling down the wooden stairs to complain that the sound of my keyboard was keeping him awake. He frequently told me to quit my foolish little project and get a real job. He used my meager savings to buy rounds of drinks for his friends, while I was getting rejected by every major bank in the city. He never supported me. He only tolerated my ambition until it started generating enough cash to fund his luxury lifestyle. And now he sat across from me in a rented luxury suit, claiming he was the architect of my success. Sterling finally began to wind down his grand presentation. He closed his binder with a loud, dramatic snap and leaned his knuckles on the polished oak table. He concluded by stating they believed this was a highly generous settlement offer. He claimed it saved me the absolute embarrassment of a public trial and allowed everyone to walk away with what they deserved. He expected full compliance today. Sterling leaned back and adjusted his silk tie. Andre smirked, running a hand over his jaw to hide a triumphant grin. Kyle gave his brother-in-law a heavy congratulatory pat on the shoulder. Even Brooke finally looked up from her tablet, offering me a pitying little smile, as if she were a benevolent queen sparing a peasant. The mediator folded his hands together and turned his attention to my side of the table. He looked at me with a neutral, professional expression, waiting for my legal counsel to begin the inevitable counter-argument. The mediator quietly asked how I responded to these demands. I did not speak a single word. I did not look at Andre or Kyle or their flashy lawyer. I kept my eyes entirely focused on the mediator. I simply turned my head slightly and gave David a brief, silent nod. David stepped forward, moving with that same lethal, quiet efficiency he always possessed. He did not open a thick binder of financial projections. He did not pull out a spreadsheet valuing the corporate assets. He simply opened his sleek black leather folder and reached inside. He extracted a single piece of paper. It was not a fresh, crisp legal document printed that morning. It was an older document. The edges of the paper were slightly yellowed with age. David placed the paper flat on the polished oak table and slid it smoothly across the surface directly into the hands of the mediator. The room held its breath. Andre frowned, his triumphant smirk faltering slightly as he tried to crane his neck to see the document. Kyle leaned forward, his eyes narrowing in deep suspicion. The mediator picked up the yellowed piece of paper. He retrieved his reading glasses from his shirt pocket and slid them onto his face. He looked down at the document, scanning the first few lines of text. He read the bold official title printed at the top of the page. Suddenly, the professional neutrality of the seasoned former judge completely shattered. He let out a sharp, audible gasp, his eyes widening in absolute shock behind his glasses. He looked up from the paper and stared directly at Andre. Kyle turned sheet white, his knees buckling as he grabbed the edge of a leather chair to keep from collapsing onto the floor. The reality of what he had just done washed over him like a bucket of ice water. He had plugged a stolen flash drive into the network of a rival firm. He had actively engaged in corporate espionage. The Securities and Exchange Commission would not just strip his financial licenses, they would permanently ban him from the industry and refer his case to the Department of Justice for criminal prosecution. He was staring down the barrel of a 10-year federal prison sentence, all because he trusted his arrogant idiot brother-in-law. Marcus Vance ended the speakerphone call with a sharp click. He looked at Kyle with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "I am going to give you exactly 30 seconds to get out of my building," Marcus said, his voice cold and flat. "If you are still standing in this office when I pick this phone back up, I am calling building security to hold you for the federal authorities." Kyle did not hesitate. He grabbed Andre by the lapels of his wrinkled suit and violently shoved him toward the heavy glass doors. Andre stumbled, protesting loudly, but Kyle was completely possessed by terror. He practically dragged Andre through the executive suite, down the marble hallway, and into the elevator. He hammered his fist against the lobby button, breathing in ragged, shallow gasps. "You absolute moron," Kyle hissed, grabbing his own hair in desperation. "You just handed them a federal criminal case on a silver platter. Do you understand what you have done? They have the server logs. They have the timestamp of the security breach. We are finished, Andre." Andre leaned against the elevator wall, staring blankly at the closing doors. His massive ego was finally beginning to crack under the weight of his own incompetence. But Kyle was not ready to surrender his entire life. Desperation is a powerful motivator, and Kyle knew that cornered animals fought the hardest. He knew that the only way to save himself from a federal indictment was to find a piece of leverage so massive that it would force me to drop the espionage charges completely. For the next 72 hours, Kyle locked himself inside the home office of his suburban house. He ignored the frantic phone calls from his wife. He barely slept, and he survived entirely on stale coffee and pure adrenaline. He used his remaining financial credentials to access every single public record, tax filing, and corporate registry document tied to my auditing firm. He scoured through thousands of pages of dense legal jargon, desperately searching for a single crack in my corporate armor. He was looking for any structural weakness he could weaponize to save his own skin. On the morning of the fourth day, the sun was just beginning to rise when Kyle found it. He printed the documents, shoving them into a manila folder before sprinting to his car. He drove recklessly through the early morning traffic, heading straight to the cheap budget motel where Andre had been staying since I evicted him from the estate. Kyle pounded on the thin wooden door until Andre finally opened it, looking exhausted and hungover. Kyle shoved past him, waving the stack of highlighted papers in the air. His eyes were bloodshot and his clothes were a wrinkled mess, but a manic, triumphant smile stretched across his face. "We have her," Kyle announced, slapping the papers onto the cheap laminate desk. "We absolutely have her, Andre. She made a mistake." Andre rubbed his bloodshot eyes, groaning softly. "What are you talking about?" Andre asked. "We do not have anything. She caught us. She has the server logs." Kyle pointed frantically at a specific highlighted line on a corporate restructuring document dated exactly 5 years ago. When Renee transferred the primary ownership of her auditing firm under her new holding company, she missed a signature, Kyle explained, his voice vibrating with frantic excitement. "It is a fatal flaw in her corporate structuring. Her legal team filed the documents with the state, but the primary authorization line on page 42 was never physically signed. It is a blank line, Andre." Andre stared at the paper, clearly not grasping the legal concept. "So what if she missed a signature?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. "It means her corporate shield is completely invalid," Kyle said, grabbing Andre by the shoulders and shaking him slightly. The irrevocable blind trust protected the house, but her business is exposed. Because the holding company transfer is technically incomplete, that $100 million auditing firm is not fully protected from marital asset laws. It pierces the corporate veil entirely. The business is fully exposed to a 50-50 split in divorce court. We can take half of her entire company. The realization hit Andre like a physical blow. $50 million. His eyes widened, and the exhaustion melted from his face instantly. His posture completely transformed, shifting from a defeated motel resident back into the arrogant, entitled king I had married. He snatched the papers from Kyle, a wicked, greedy smile spreading across his face. They did not waste a single second. Kyle used the last of his professional goodwill to hire the most aggressive, sleazy litigation attorney he could find on a pure contingency basis. They formally filed a massive lawsuit against me the very next morning. The legal summons demanded $50 million, a complete freeze on my corporate assets, and a permanent injunction against any criminal espionage charges being filed against them in exchange for a quiet settlement. I was sitting at my polished walnut desk when the process server finally arrived. David walked into my office, his face a mask of professional calm, and handed me the thick stack of legal summons. I read through the aggressive demands and the desperate legal theories Kyle had cobbled together. I saw the highlighted section pointing out the missing signature on the holding company transfer. I knew exactly what I needed to do next. I picked up my cell phone and called my lead corporate counsel. I stood up and paced around my office, making sure my footsteps sounded erratic and heavy. I put on the absolute best performance of my entire life. I let my voice tremble. I forced my breathing to sound shallow and panicked. I practically begged my lawyer through the phone, knowing exactly how the sleazy legal game was played. "They found the missing signature," I said, my voice cracking with manufactured distress. "They are going to take half my company. You have to stop them. Please just agree to an early mediation. Tell their lawyers whatever they want to hear. Just get them to the table before they go to the press with this. I cannot lose $50 million. Please just make it stop." My lawyer, who was fully aware of my actual overarching strategy, played his part perfectly on his end. He knew that opposing counsel would relay every ounce of my supposed terror directly to Kyle and Andre. And they certainly did. When the litigation attorney called Andre later that afternoon to report that the Ice Queen had finally broken, that I was terrified and desperately begging for immediate mediation, Andre felt like he had conquered the entire world. He felt like a brilliant tactician who had finally defeated his oppressive wife. He had won. He was about to be a 50 millionaire. The celebration began immediately. Andre and Brooke decided they needed to reward themselves for their impending massive payday. Andre opened a brand new high-interest credit card under the assumption that he would easily pay it off the second the settlement cleared. He booked 2 first-class tickets to Dubai for a luxury celebration vacation. He reserved a 5-star penthouse suite overlooking the ocean. They popped expensive champagne in their cheap motel room, toasting to my absolute downfall. The day of the early mediation arrived exactly 1 week later. The weather was bright and sunny, an arrogant reflection of the mood Andre and his team carried. They rented a luxury black car service to drive them to the downtown mediation center, refusing to show up in a standard taxi. Andre, Kyle, and Brooke strutted into the mahogany-paneled conference room like conquering royalty. Andre was wearing a brand-new tailored suit he had bought on his new credit card. Kyle had his chest puffed out, clutching his briefcase like it held the winning lottery ticket. They completely ignored my legal team and took their seats at the heavy wooden table with exaggerated swagger. Brooke did not even bother to look up when I walked into the room. She was sitting right next to Andre, entirely abandoning her humble, earthy wellness persona. She was actively swiping on her expensive tablet, zooming in on bright, glossy pictures. She was casually browsing Zillow, searching for a $20 million mega mansion to buy with my money. The mediator stared at Andre with a mixture of shock and professional disbelief. He placed the yellowed document back onto the polished oak table and slid it carefully toward the sleazy litigation attorney. It is a fully executed, irrevocable post-nuptial agreement, the mediator announced, his voice echoing in the quiet room. Sterling stared at the paper, his face turning a deep shade of purple. He spun around and glared furiously at Andre, demanding to know why his client had explicitly lied about never signing a prenuptial or postnuptial contract. I folded my hands on the table and finally broke my silence. I delivered the devastating context with a calm, steady voice that commanded the attention of the entire room. 6 years ago, I explained my firm was just a struggling startup operating out of a damp basement. I desperately needed a $500,000 business loan to scale my software operations and hire my first real developers. I asked my husband to simply co-sign the corporate loan paperwork to give the bank some peace of mind. I looked directly into the eyes of Andre. Instead of supporting his wife, he laughed right in my face. He called my technology idea absolute garbage and a guaranteed failure. He was terrified that my risky little business venture would ruin his pristine personal credit score. He completely refused to sign the bank loan unless I drafted an ironclad liability waiver. Andre stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently as the memory of his own incredible selfishness hit him. I continued my explanation, making sure the mediator and the lawyers heard every single word. Andre voluntarily signed a legally binding document, relinquishing all rights, all equity, and all future profits of my company in exchange for total financial immunity. He wanted to make absolutely certain that if my business went bankrupt, he would not be held responsible for a single dime of my debt. By protecting his precious credit score, Andre had legally severed himself from a $100 million empire. He had traded $50 million for a piece of paper that protected his ability to lease a luxury sports car. Kyle felt his impending payday evaporating into thin air. Sweating profusely, he lunged forward and snatched the document from the table. His eyes darted wildly across the legal text, his breathing becoming rapid and shallow. "This cannot be legal," Kyle stammered, his voice pitching upward in absolute panic. "This is a fake document, Renee. You cannot just hide this from the courts. I can break this in front of a judge by Friday." My high-power corporate attorney leaned forward, resting his elbows on the heavy wooden table. He looked at Kyle with an expression of absolute predatory calm. "I would not advise you to speak on legal matters," Kyle, my attorney, said smoothly. "In fact, you should be calling your own criminal defense attorney right this second." Kyle froze, the yellowed piece of paper trembling in his sweaty hands. He swallowed hard, trying to maintain his arrogant Wall Street persona, but the fear in his eyes was completely undeniable. He looked like a man who had just stepped onto a landmine and heard the click. I kept my gaze locked onto Kyle. "When you decided to play corporate spy and hack into my home network, you made a catastrophic miscalculation, Kyle," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "My company does not just build standard accounting software. We build military-grade forensic auditing algorithms designed to hunt down missing money across global networks. When you plugged that stolen flash drive into my decoy server, my system did exactly what I programmed it to do. It immediately traced your unauthorized intrusion right back to the source. It followed your digital footprint straight through your secure Wall Street firm internal network." Kyle slumped back into his chair, his mouth falling open in horror. He knew exactly what he had hiding on his work servers, and the realization that I had seen it all washed over him like a bucket of ice water. "Once my software breached your corporate firewall," I continued, leaning forward to ensure he heard his doom clearly. "It ran a comprehensive diagnostic audit on your personal trading history. You have been a very busy man, Kyle. You spent the last 4 years engaging in highly illegal insider trading. My algorithm found the exact offshore shell companies you set up in the Cayman Islands. It documented exactly how you have been using your firm proprietary algorithms to systematically skim money from your wealthiest clients to pad your own personal accounts. You thought you were an untouchable financial genius, but you left a digital trail so wide and so obvious that my software flagged your entire criminal operation in less than 3 minutes." The silence in the mediation room was absolute. Sterling, the sleazy litigation attorney, was already packing his legal binders into his briefcase, wanting absolutely nothing to do with a massive federal criminal conspiracy. Andre was staring at Kyle in mute horror, realizing that his brilliant brother-in-law had just doomed them all. I leaned back in my chair, offering Kyle a cold, merciless smile. "You are not a financial mastermind, Kyle," I told him. "You are just a common thief in an expensive suit. And unfortunately for you, my legal team has already forwarded the complete unredacted audit logs directly to the Enforcement Division of the Securities and Exchange Commission. The FBI likely has a federal warrant for your arrest sitting on a judge's desk as we speak." From the corner of the room, a sharp gasp shattered the heavy silence. Alicia, my sister-in-law and the wife of Kyle, had been sitting quietly in a leather armchair, waiting to celebrate the massive settlement they thought they were going to extort from me. Until this exact moment, Alicia had carried herself with the same smug entitlement as her brother Andre. She loved her lavish country club lifestyle, her luxury vehicles, and her designer handbags funded by her successful husband. Now the terrifying reality of her situation came crashing down around her. Alicia realized in an instant that her husband was going to a federal penitentiary for a very long time. She realized that the government would freeze their bank accounts, seize their pristine suburban estate, and auction off every single asset they owned to pay federal restitution. Her entire world was evaporating right in front of her eyes, and the public humiliation would destroy her social standing forever. Alicia shot out of her chair like she had been physically struck. She marched across the room and stood directly over Kyle, her face contorted with absolute panic and rage. "You told me we were protected!" Alicia screamed, her voice echoing shrilly off the mahogany walls. "You told me this was a foolproof plan to get rich. You skimmed money from your clients, Kyle. You ruined our lives for what?" Kyle reached up weakly, trying to grab her hand to quiet her down, but Alicia violently slapped his arm away. She did not care about supporting her husband in his darkest hour. She only cared that her wealthy, comfortable life was completely over, and she was looking for a lifeboat. "Do not touch me!" Alicia shrieked, backing away from him as if he were diseased. "I am calling a divorce lawyer the second I walk out of this building. I am not going down with you, Kyle. I am taking the kids and I am taking whatever money is left in my personal accounts before the feds freeze them. You are entirely on your own." Kyle buried his face in his hands, letting out a pathetic, sobbing groan, while Andre sat frozen at the table, completely abandoned and thoroughly defeated by the very people he thought would secure his fortune. The sound of Kyle sobbing into his hands filled the heavy silence of the conference room. Alicia was already halfway out the door, her heels clicking furiously against the marble as she sprinted toward her impending divorce. Andre remained frozen in his chair, his jaw slack as he stared at the empty space where his $50 million fantasy had just evaporated. But the shockwave of my total victory was not finished tearing through the room. Sitting directly next to Andre, Brooke finally lowered her expensive tablet. The glossy images of waterfront mega mansions, indoor infinity pools, and private tennis courts faded to black on her screen. She blinked rapidly, her perfectly manicured fingers gripping the edge of the mahogany table so tightly her knuckles turned white. It took a few agonizing moments for her carefully curated mind to process the absolute magnitude of what had just occurred. The post-nuptial agreement meant Andre had zero claim to my company. The failed corporate shield argument meant there would be no massive settlement check. Andre was not going to receive $50 million. He was not going to receive $50,000. He was walking away with absolutely nothing. The serene, benevolent expression that Brooke wore like a second skin completely melted away. The peaceful, spiritual aura of the enlightened wellness instructor vanished into thin air, revealing the cold, calculating opportunist lurking underneath. Brooke pushed her heavy leather chair back with a loud screeching scrape against the hardwood floor and stood up. When she spoke, her voice was completely unrecognizable. The breathy, sweet tone she had used to charm Andre was gone entirely, replaced by a harsh, grating screech that commanded the attention of everyone left in the room. She pointed a trembling finger directly at the face of Andre. "You lied to me, you pathetic loser!" Brooke yelled, her voice echoing violently off the wood-paneled walls. "You promised me an empire. You sat in my tiny apartment and told me you were the brilliant mastermind behind $100 million corporation. You told me you were going to crush her in court and that we would spend the rest of our lives traveling the world in private jets and buying whatever we wanted. You do not have anything. You are completely broke. You are nothing but a fraud." Andre flinched violently, as if she had physically struck him across the face. He looked up at her, his eyes wide with a mixture of profound betrayal and desperate pleading. "Brooke, please," he stammered, reaching a shaking hand out toward her across the table. "We can figure this out. I can still get a high-paying job. We can still be together. I still love you." "Figure it out," Brooke scoffed, letting out a sharp, cruel laugh that held absolutely no warmth. "You think I am going to stay with a man who cannot even afford the lease on his own luxury car? I gave up my prime dating years for you because you promised me ultimate financial security. I am not spending my life clipping coupons in a cheap motel room with a man who just got completely outsmarted and destroyed by his own wife. We are entirely done, Andre. Do not ever call my phone again. Do not ever come near me." Brooke then did something so incredibly audacious that even my seasoned corporate attorney raised an eyebrow in genuine surprise. She physically turned her back on Andre and looked directly across the polished table at me, her face instantly contorted into a mask of sudden manufactured sorrow. She clasped her hands together tightly over her chest, attempting to summon back that soft, spiritual victim voice she had perfected over the years. "Renee, you have to understand that I am a victim in all of this too," Brooke said, her eyes pleading with me as she attempted to forge a bizarre alliance. "Andre is a toxic, manipulative narcissist. He completely brainwashed me. He told me horrible, abusive things about you and manipulated me into believing he was the injured party in this marriage. I am just a peaceful, spiritual person who got violently dragged into his toxic web of deceit. I have suffered so much severe emotional trauma from his endless lies. Honestly, given what he put me through and how much time I have wasted, I think it is only fair that your legal team considers a small hardship settlement for my pain and suffering. Just $100,000 to help me restart my healing journey." I stared at her in absolute silence, marveling at the sheer, unadulterated greed of the woman standing before me. She had actively participated in trying to steal $50 million from me, she had slept with my husband in my own bed, and she was now brazenly asking for a consolation prize from my bank account. But before I could even open my mouth to respond to her ridiculous demand, the final thread of sanity holding Andre together completely snapped. He had lost his massive corporate buyout. He had lost his pride. He had watched his brilliant Wall Street lawyer flee the room in terror and his brother-in-law face imminent federal prison. And now his beautiful trophy girlfriend was ruthlessly abandoning him while simultaneously begging his wealthy wife for a financial handout. The humiliation was absolute, and it drove him entirely over the precipice of reason. Andre leapt out of his leather chair with terrifying speed. He lunged forward and grabbed Brooke tightly by the upper arm, spinning her aggressively back around to face him. Brooke shrieked in genuine surprise, struggling wildly to pull away from his desperate clawing grip. "Let go of me, you broke freak!" she screamed, trying to pry his fingers off her bare arm. "You cannot leave me!" Andre roared, his voice tearing through the room with raw primal fury. His face was a deep shade of purple with rage, and spit flew from his lips as he screamed directly into her terrified face. "You owe me your entire life, Brooke. I took out a $150,000 secret second mortgage on my own parents' retirement home just to cover your filthy tracks. I drained every single favor I had to pay off your massive fraudulent PPP loans. You invented a fake wellness company with fake employees to steal government relief money during a global pandemic. I paid off the feds so you would not rot in a federal prison cell." The entire mediation room froze instantly. The mediator stopped shuffling his legal papers, his hands hovering in midair. My corporate attorney slowly lowered his gold pen to the table. Even Kyle, who was still sobbing quietly in the corner, went completely silent. The sheer magnitude of the criminal confession hung in the air like a live hand grenade waiting to detonate. David broke the absolute silence. His voice was smooth and dangerously quiet, cutting through the lingering echo of the explosive confession. He looked at Andre with a predatory smile that chilled the entire room. "A second mortgage?" David asked, leaning forward and resting his hands on the polished oak table. "On exactly which property, Andre?" Andre was breathing heavily, his chest heaving under his ruined luxury suit. He was so consumed by his fury at Brooke and so desperate to prove how much he had sacrificed for her that he completely lost whatever tiny fraction of common sense he had left. He did not realize he was in a room full of lawyers and a sworn mediator. He only saw the woman who had just humiliated him and the wife he desperately wanted to defeat. "It does not matter which property," Andre spat out, glaring at me with raw, unfiltered hatred. "It was that commercial warehouse down in the Arts District. The one you bought 3 years ago and completely ignored. I used it to save her life." David tilted his head slightly, feigning polite curiosity. "But Renee holds the sole title to that specific commercial property, Andre. She never authorized a loan against that building. The bank would require her physical signature on the loan origination documents. How exactly did you secure a $150,000 line of credit without her explicit legal consent?" Andre let out a harsh, arrogant laugh, crossing his arms over his chest. "It is called being a husband, David. I managed her life for years. I handled the things she was too busy to care about. I knew her signature better than she did. I signed the paperwork myself. I had the documents notarized by a buddy of mine who owed me a favor. It was marital property anyway, so I was just accessing my half a little early. I needed the cash to keep Brooke out of a federal penitentiary, and my useless wife was too busy staring at computer screens to even notice the money was gone." Brooke suddenly let out a horrified gasp, covering her mouth with both hands. Her eyes widened in absolute terror as she finally realized what Andre was actually saying out loud on the record. "Let me make sure I fully comprehend this," David said, his voice echoing in the dead quiet of the room. "You just admitted in front of a sworn mediator and multiple witnesses that you used forged documents to take out a massive fraudulent loan against a property you do not own. You then took that stolen cash and funneled it directly to your mistress." Andre puffed out his chest, trying to maintain his bravado. "I did what I had to do to protect the woman I loved, something Renee knows absolutely nothing about." David did not even blink. He just kept smiling that terrifying, predatory smile. "You did not just commit financial infidelity, Andre. You committed felony bank fraud. You forged the signature of the primary title holder to illegally secure funds from a federally insured financial institution. And you did it specifically to cover up another massive federal crime regarding fraudulent government relief loans. The amount of federal statutes you have just violated in a single breath is genuinely staggering." The color completely drained from the face of Andre. The aggressive posture melted away instantly, leaving behind a terrified small man who finally realized the gravity of his own words. He looked around the room, his eyes darting frantically like a trapped animal. He looked at his own lawyer, the sleazy litigation attorney named Sterling, hoping for a miraculous legal defense. But Sterling was already standing up, actively packing his binders into his briefcase with frantic, jerky movements. Sterling held his hands up, stepping away from the heavy wooden table. "I am formally withdrawing as your legal counsel, effective immediately," Sterling announced, his voice trembling slightly. "I cannot and will not represent a client who freely admits to active felony bank fraud during a mediation session. You are completely on your own." Sterling practically ran to the heavy oak doors, pulling them open and fleeing down the marble hallway without a single backward glance. Andre was left standing entirely alone. His lawyer had abandoned him. His wife had outsmarted him. His mistress had dumped him. And his brother-in-law was still sobbing in the corner, facing his own imminent destruction. Brooke backed away from Andre, pressing herself against the far wall of the conference room. "I had nothing to do with this," she babbled, her voice shaking with genuine panic. "I did not know the money was stolen. He lied to me. He told me it was his own savings. I am completely innocent. I finally spoke, breaking my silence with a calm, measured tone that commanded the entire room. "You are not innocent, Brooke. You stole $150,000 from the federal government using fake employee rosters and dummy shell companies. And then you knowingly accepted stolen bank funds to try and hide your tracks. Ignorance is not a valid legal defense when you are holding a bag of stolen cash." I slowly smoothed out the invisible wrinkles on my tailored beige suit. I looked at Andre, who was trembling visibly, his bravado entirely shattered. I looked at Kyle, who had buried his head between his knees in absolute despair. I looked at Alicia, who was staring at her husband and her brother with pure, unadulterated disgust. And I looked at Brooke, who was sliding down the wall looking for an escape route that simply did not exist. I raised my left arm and calmly checked the face of my watch. It was exactly 2:00 in the afternoon. "I thought you might bring that up," I said, my voice perfectly steady and clear. "I knew about the fraudulent second mortgage 3 weeks ago, Andre. My forensic accounting software flagged the unapproved credit line the exact moment it was opened. I just needed you to admit to the forgery on the record." Andre opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He was suffocating under the crushing weight of his own monumental stupidity. He had handed me the final piece of the puzzle, wrapped in a bow of his own raging ego. The heavy wooden doors of the mediation room suddenly swung wide open. The solid thud made everyone in the room flinch violently. Two large men dressed in sharp dark suits walked purposefully into the room. They bypassed the empty chairs and walked directly toward my side of the table. Their expressions were stern and unreadable, and they carried themselves with the undeniable heavy authority of federal law enforcement. They stopped just behind the chairs where Andre and Brooke were standing. The taller of the two agents reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a gold badge, flashing it clearly in the bright light of the conference room. The taller agent stepped forward, the overhead lights catching the gleaming gold seal of his badge. He introduced himself as a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation Financial Crimes Division. His voice was incredibly calm, carrying the undeniable weight of absolute authority as he looked directly at my husband. Andre stood frozen in place, his mouth hanging open as the agent recited his full legal name and stated that they had a federal warrant for his immediate arrest. The agent listed the charges with mechanical precision. He cited aggravated identity theft, wire fraud, and felony bank fraud. The words echoed off the mahogany walls of the mediation room, sinking into the heavy silence like lead weights. Andre finally found his voice, but it was nothing more than a pathetic, high-pitched squeak. He took a stumbling step backward, bumping into his leather chair. He stammered frantically, claiming there was a massive misunderstanding. He pointed a shaking finger at me, begging the agents to ask his wife, explaining that we were legally married and that it was simply a marital dispute over shared assets. He tried to tell them that he was a victim of a vicious divorce tactic. The federal agent did not even blink. He smoothly grabbed Andre by the shoulder, spinning him around with practiced efficiency. He forced my arrogant husband to place his hands behind his back. The cold, sharp click of the steel handcuffs locking around the wrists of Andre was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard in my entire life. Andre let out a loud, desperate sob. He looked at me over his shoulder, his face pale and covered in a sheen of cold sweat. He begged me to tell them to stop. He pleaded with me to call off the dogs, promising he would drop the lawsuit, promising he would walk away with nothing if I just made the federal agents leave. I sat perfectly still in my chair, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I just watched him with a blank, unreadable expression, offering him absolutely no lifeline. I let him drown in the reality of his own catastrophic choices. While the primary agent was reading Andre his Miranda rights, a subtle movement in the corner of the room caught my eye. Brooke was attempting to perform a magical disappearing act. She had gathered her expensive silk scarf and her designer handbag, and was slowly sliding her feet across the plush carpet, edging her way toward the heavy double doors at the back of the conference room. She kept her head down, trying to make herself as invisible as possible, hoping the sheer chaos of the arrest would allow her to slip away into the downtown traffic. Just as her manicured hand reached out to grasp the brass door handle, the heavy wood swung inward. A female federal agent stepped directly into the doorway, completely blocking the exit. The female agent looked Brooke up and down with absolute disdain. She addressed Brooke by her real legal name, dropping the spiritual wellness persona instantly. The agent informed her that she was not going anywhere. She stated that they had a separate federal warrant to seize all of her digital devices, her cell phone, and her laptop. The agent noted that Brooke was officially wanted for questioning regarding widespread phantom payroll schemes and fraudulent federal relief loans. Brooke dropped her designer handbag onto the floor. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking gray and sickly. Her knees visibly wobbled as the female agent instructed her to place her hands against the wall. The peaceful yoga instructor, who had spent years preaching about positive energy and light, was now hyperventilating as a federal agent patted her down for concealed electronics. Just as the agents began to maneuver Andre toward the exit, a violent commotion erupted out in the marble hallway. I could hear high heels clicking frantically against the floor and a loud, shrill voice demanding entry. The heavy doors were shoved open so forcefully they bounced against the wall. Brenda, my mother-in-law, burst into the mediation center like a chaotic tornado. This was the exact same woman who just 48 hours ago had called me from a hospital bed, weeping weakly into the phone. She had claimed she was suffering from a massive stress-induced cardiac event. She had tried to guilt-trip me into dropping the divorce proceedings, claiming that the heartbreak of our separation was literally sending her to an early grave. Yet here she was, sprinting into a corporate mediation room with the speed and agility of an Olympic athlete. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup was flawless, and there was absolutely zero trace of cardiovascular distress in her flushed, angry face. Her miraculous recovery was truly a medical marvel. Brenda took one look at her precious golden child standing in federal handcuffs and let out a blood-curdling shriek. She completely ignored the federal agents, ignoring Kyle, who was still crying in the corner, and ignoring Brooke, who was pressed against the wall. She threw herself entirely across the room, sprinting directly toward my side of the table. Before my lawyer could even stand up to block her, Brenda dropped to her knees right in front of my chair. She grabbed the fabric of my tailored beige pants, clutching my knees, as she fell into a theatrical display of hysterical weeping. She wailed at the top of her lungs, begging me to stop this madness. She screamed that I was destroying her family and ruining the life of a good, innocent man. She looked up at me with tears streaming down her perfectly powdered cheeks, invoking the name of God and the sanctity of my marriage vows. Brenda passionately demanded that I show Christian forgiveness. She lectured me about family duty, claiming that Andre had simply made a tiny, desperate mistake because he was lost and confused. She begged me to call off the federal agents, completely ignoring the fact that private citizens cannot simply cancel an FBI bank fraud indictment. I looked down at the woman who had spent years making backhanded comments about my career. I looked at the woman who had happily covered for her son's constant infidelity and who had faked a heart attack to emotionally terrorize me. I felt no pity. I felt no sorrow. I only felt a cold, surgical precision. I slowly stood up, forcing Brenda to release her grip on my pants. I looked down at her sniveling, pathetic form on the carpet. "You want to talk to me about forgiveness, Brenda?" I asked, my voice cutting through her loud, theatrical sobbing like a razor blade. "You want to lecture me about Christian duty and morality after your son stole from the government and forged my name to fund his mistress?" Brenda sniffled, looking up at me with wide, innocent eyes, acting as if she were the ultimate moral authority in the room. She nodded, claiming that the Lord commands us to forgive those who trespass against us. I reached into the pocket of my beige suit jacket and calmly pulled out my cell phone. I looked directly into the eyes of my mother-in-law, watching the confusion slowly spread across her face. "Let us talk about the church building fund, Brenda," I said, my voice dropping to a low, icy whisper that carried perfectly across the dead quiet room. "Let us talk about the sacred community fund that you have been the wholly trusted treasurer of for the last 10 years. Brenda instantly stopped crying. Her mouth snapped shut, and her eyes darted nervously toward her handcuffed son. I unlocked my phone screen, keeping my gaze locked onto her terrified face. I tapped open an audio file I had retrieved from the hidden archives of the home network. I turned the volume all the way up and pressed play. The crisp, high-definition audio cut through the stifling silence of the mediation room. I held my phone steady as the voice of my mother-in-law filled the space. Brenda sounded relaxed and arrogant, her words slightly slurred from what was clearly a very long and expensive lunch. "Andre, darling." The recorded voice of Brenda purred through the speakers. "The Lord truly provides for those who know how to help themselves. Those naive fools in the congregation actually think their weekly tithes are paying for a brand new community youth center. They practically empty their wallets every single Sunday. Little do they know they just financed my 2-week exclusive wellness retreat in the Swiss Alps." The recording captured the sound of ice clinking in a crystal glass, followed by the deep, unmistakable chuckle of Andre. "Just make sure you keep sending the transfers through the corporate accounts." "Mom," the recorded voice of Andre replied, his tone dripping with smug superiority. "I have the shell companies set up perfectly. We bounce the church funds through my consulting business, and it comes out looking like legitimate administrative expenses. The church board will never know the difference, and your luxury spa treatments stay completely tax-free." I pressed the screen of my phone, stopping the playback. The silence that slammed back into the room was absolute and terrifying. Brenda remained on her knees on the plush carpet, but her entire demeanor had shattered into a million pieces. Her perfectly powdered face turned an ashen shade of gray. The theatrical tears instantly dried up, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. Her jaw hung open as she stared at my phone, her eyes wide with the realization that her most guarded, devastating secret was now public knowledge. The two federal agents standing behind Andre exchanged a very meaningful glance. The taller agent reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a small black notebook, clicking his pen. "Money laundering and embezzling from a non-profit religious organization." The agent noted, his voice deadly calm. "I believe the Internal Revenue Service and our Financial Crimes Unit will be very interested in adding those charges to your federal indictment, Andre." Andre squeezed his eyes shut, his handcuffed wrists twitching behind his back. He had just heard himself confess to money laundering on a crystal-clear audio recording. His own mother had dragged him right into another massive felony charge, and he had actively helped her do it. Brenda scrambled backward on the floor, her designer skirt twisting around her knees. "That is a fake recording," she stammered, her voice cracking with absolute desperation. "That is not my voice. Renee is trying to frame me. I am a devout woman. I am the trusted treasurer of Grace Fellowship. I would never steal from the house of God." I looked down at her, feeling a profound sense of satisfaction. My voice remained perfectly level and clinical as I dismantled her final pathetic defense in front of the entire room. "You are not a devout woman, Brenda," I said, looking directly into her panicked eyes. "You are a common thief who uses religion as a convenient shield." About 3 months ago, the board of directors at the megachurch started noticing some very troubling financial discrepancies. The new roof they raised money for was never built. The youth wing remained an empty dirt lot despite 2 years of aggressive fundraising. The church elders grew suspicious, but they did not want to cause a massive public scandal without absolute undeniable proof. I took a slow step forward, towering over my mother-in-law. So the board quietly reached out to a private forensic auditing firm to conduct a comprehensive independent review of the church finances. I continued. They hired my company, Brenda. They handed me full, unrestricted access to every single ledger, every bank statement, and every expense report you ever filed. Brenda let out a small, strangled gasp, wrapping her arms around her stomach, as if she were going to be physically sick. "My algorithms did not even have to work hard to find the missing money." I stated, my words dropping like anvils onto the quiet room. "You and Andre were incredibly sloppy. You treated the sacred offering plates like your own personal piggy bank. I tracked every single stolen dollar directly from the church building fund into your personal accounts. I have the receipts for the chemical peels, the deep tissue massages, the luxury resort stays, and the first-class flights. I documented exactly how you funneled over $400,000 through dummy corporations set up by your brilliant son." "I gave my life to that church!" Brenda suddenly wailed, abandoning her denial and switching instantly to playing the ultimate victim. She clawed at the carpet, her face twisting in ugly defiance. I volunteered thousands of hours of my time. I organized the bake sales and the charity drives. I deserved a stipend for my hard work. I was entitled to that money to treat myself. You stole from the people who trusted you the most, I replied, completely unmoved by her pitiful justification. You stole from working-class families who gave their hard-earned money believing they were building a better community. You traded their faith for hot stone massages and champagne brunches. The federal agents were writing furiously now, documenting every word of her frantic, impromptu confession. Andre was shaking his head back and forth, silently cursing his mother for making everything exponentially worse for him. Brooke was still pressed against the back wall, trapped by the female agent, watching the entire Wilson family dynasty collapse into a pile of federal crimes and public disgrace. She realized that she had tied her wagon to a family of absolute criminals who were all going down together. Brenda looked up at me, her eyes begging for mercy. "Renee, please," she sobbed, crawling forward and trying to grab my shoes again. I stepped neatly out of her reach. "You can keep it quiet, Renee. You do not have to give the report to the board. We are family. I will pay it back. I swear to God I will pay back every single dime. Just keep the audit a secret." I calmly raised my left arm and checked my watch, brushing a piece of lint off my tailored beige sleeve. "I am afraid that is completely impossible, Brenda," I said, offering her a cold, merciless smile. The Board of Elders did not just want a private written report, they were completely horrified by my findings. They want full transparency with the people they serve. Brenda stopped moving, her eyes darting around the room as the ultimate horror finally dawned on her. "They have called an emergency town hall meeting for the entire congregation," I announced, making sure every single word echoed with absolute finality. "The meeting begins tonight at exactly 7 o'clock in the main sanctuary. There will be over 2,000 church members in attendance, waiting to hear exactly why their youth center was never built." I leaned down slightly, ensuring Brenda could see the absolute victory shining in my eyes. "And I am the guest of honor, Brenda. I will be standing at the pulpit with a projector and a microphone, presenting the full, unredacted financial report to everyone you know. I am going to show your entire congregation exactly where their money went." The sheer scale of the Grace Fellowship megachurch was genuinely staggering. The massive sanctuary held over 2,000 velvet-lined seats, and every single one of them was occupied. Word of an emergency congregational meeting had spread through the wealthy suburban community like wildfire. The air inside the colossal room crackled with nervous anticipation and hushed whispers. I walked down the center aisle with slow, deliberate steps, feeling the weight of thousands of eyes on me. I wore a sharply tailored jet-black suit that projected absolute authority and calm. I took my designated seat in the very front row center, perfectly positioned to witness the impending destruction. The heavy oak doors near the choir loft swung open and a collective gasp rippled through the packed pews. 5 stern-faced church elders marched out onto the polished wooden stage. Walking right in the middle of them, looking like a prisoner being led to the gallows, was Brenda. The transformation was startling. The arrogant, perfectly groomed matriarch, who usually paraded through these halls like royalty, was entirely gone. Her shoulders were slumped, her expensive silk blouse was wrinkled, and her face was blotchy and pale. She could barely lift her head to look at the congregation she had ruled over for a decade. Pastor Miller stepped up to the crystal podium, adjusting his microphone with a heavy sigh. He was a tall, imposing man whose usual booming, charismatic voice was replaced by a tone of profound sorrow and righteous anger. He looked out over his flock and held up a thick black leather binder. I recognized it immediately as the comprehensive forensic audit my company had generated. "My brothers and sisters," Pastor Miller began, his voice echoing mournfully through the state-of-the-art sound system. "We are gathered here tonight to address a betrayal of the highest order. For the past 2 years, we have all sacrificed and donated our hard-earned money to build a safe haven for our youth. We trusted that our contributions were doing the work of the Lord. Instead, they were funding a lifestyle of gluttony and deceit." Pastor Miller opened the binder and began reading my findings out loud to the dead silent room. He did not spare Brenda a single ounce of dignity. He read the exact dates and dollar amounts. He detailed how Brenda had systematically skimmed over $400,000 from the offering plates and the building fund. He explained exactly how she had funneled the stolen cash through fake consulting invoices billed to the shell companies owned by her son Andre. The congregation reacted with visceral shock. Gasps of horror and angry murmurs erupted from the velvet pews. Pastor Miller read the itemized receipts out loud, exposing how the youth center money was actually spent on first-class flights to Geneva, exclusive mud baths, luxury alpine resorts, and designer handbags. Brenda stood trembling behind the elders. She suddenly lunged forward, trying to grab the microphone from the pastor. She wept loudly, screaming that the devil was testing them and that she was being framed by a vindictive daughter-in-law. An elder swiftly grabbed her arm and pulled her back, forcing her to stand and face her crimes. She looked down at me sitting calmly in the front row, and the sheer venom in her tear-filled eyes was completely powerless against the cold, hard facts in the audit. Effective immediately, Pastor Miller announced, his voice rising in volume to quiet the angry crowd. Brenda Wilson is permanently stripped of her title as head treasurer and removed from the board of elders. Furthermore, the church leadership has voted unanimously. We demand the immediate return of every single stolen cent by tomorrow morning. If the funds are not fully restored, we will turn this entire audit over to the federal authorities and cooperate fully with the ongoing FBI investigation into her son. The public excommunication was absolute. I looked around the massive room and watched the congregation turn on her like a pack of wolves. These were the exact same wealthy, judgmental women who used to sit with Brenda at Sunday brunch and gossip about my failing business. They were the ones who used to whisper that I was a terrible wife for working late instead of attending evening Bible study. Now those same women were glaring at Brenda with pure, unadulterated disgust. They pointed their fingers and called her a hypocrite and a thief. Brenda was officially a pariah, completely exiled from the only social circle that gave her life meaning. Pastor Miller lowered his head, gripping the edges of the podium. The most heartbreaking part of this betrayal, he said, his voice cracking slightly, is that our youth center project is now entirely bankrupt. We simply do not have the funds to break ground this year. The children of our community will have to pay the price for this greed. This was my exact cue. I stood up smoothly from my front row seat, smoothing the jacket of my black suit. The murmuring in the sanctuary instantly died down as 2,000 people held their breath to see what the wrong daughter-in-law would do. Pastor Miller, I said, my voice projecting clearly without needing a microphone. My mother-in-law chose a path of selfishness and greed. She chose to steal from the very community that trusted her. But I believe that the actions of one corrupt woman should not destroy the dreams of the children in this congregation. I reached into my designer handbag and pulled out a small rectangular piece of paper. I held it up so the front rows could see it clearly. I choose a different path. I announced, my voice ringing with total conviction. I am writing a personal certified check for $400,000 right now. I will personally cover the entire stolen deficit. Your youth center will be built, and it will be fully funded tonight. For 3 seconds, the entire megachurch was completely silent. Then the room absolutely erupted. 2,000 people jumped to their feet, cheering and applauding with deafening volume. Pastor Miller looked down at me with an expression of pure reverence and profound gratitude. I had just bought the loyalty and respect of the entire congregation in one single brilliant move. Brenda collapsed into a heap on the wooden stage, sobbing hysterically into her hands. The very people she had led and manipulated for years were now giving a standing ovation to the woman she had tried to destroy. I did not even look at her again. I had completely buried her. I handed the check to a stunned church elder and turned around, walking gracefully down the long center aisle. People reached out to shake my hand and pat my shoulder as I passed, thanking me profusely. I pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped out of the stifling sanctuary and into the cool, crisp evening air. The massive church parking lot was completely empty and bathed in the dim yellow glow of the streetlights. The roar of the congregation faded behind the thick walls as I walked confidently toward my luxury sedan. Suddenly, the crunch of gravel echoed loudly in the quiet night. A dark shadow detached itself from the side of a large passenger van parked 2 spaces away from my car. I stopped in my tracks, my hand hovering near the alarm button on my keys. Brooke stepped out into the harsh yellow streetlight. She looked absolutely unhinged. Her expensive designer dress was torn at the hem, and her carefully styled hair was a tangled mess. Her makeup was smeared darkly down her cheeks from crying, and she was shivering violently in the cool air. She looked nothing like the smug, confident mistress from the mediation room. She was cornered, desperate, and ready to lash out with whatever remaining venom she had left in her system. She stepped directly into my path, blocking me from reaching the driver's side door of my car. The streetlights cast harsh shadows across her face, highlighting the dark circles under her eyes and the frantic, manic energy radiating from her entire body. "You think you have won, Renee?" She spat, her voice a harsh, raspy whisper that carried over the empty parking lot. "You think you can just destroy Andre and Brenda and walk away completely untouched? You think you are completely invincible sitting up there in your high-rise office with your perfect little algorithms?" I stood perfectly still, the car keys held loosely in my hand. I did not step back. I did not show a single ounce of fear or intimidation. I just watched her unraveling in real time, noting how her hands shook uncontrollably as she clutched a cheap knockoff designer scarf around her shoulders. "I am going to burn your entire world to the ground," Brooke snarled, taking a step closer until I could smell the stale coffee and sheer panic radiating off her skin. "I have friends in the media, Renee. I know journalists at major financial publications. I have thousands of followers who listen to every single word I say. By tomorrow morning, I am going to blanket the internet with a very compelling story about how your precious financial technology company is actually built on a foundation of systemic exploitation." Brooke let out a short, bitter laugh, thinking she had finally found my weak spot. "I am going to tell the press that your lending algorithms specifically target and discriminate against minority-owned small businesses." She threatened, her eyes wide and unblinking. "I will say you programmed the software to deny them fair interest rates, to redline entire neighborhoods, and to line your own pockets while crushing vulnerable entrepreneurs. In today's climate, a story like that will catch fire instantly. The regulatory boards will swarm your offices. Your investors will pull out before lunch. I will make sure your reputation is absolutely pulverized and you lose everything you have ever built." She stood there, chest heaving, waiting for me to panic. She was waiting for me to beg her to reconsider, to offer her a deal, or some kind of financial payoff to buy her silence. She was hoping I would lower myself to her level and negotiate with a blackmailer. I did not even blink. The cool evening breeze ruffled the collar of my suit jacket as I looked at her with a mixture of clinical fascination and absolute pity. "You truly do not understand how the adult world works, Brooke," I said, my voice dangerously low and smooth. "You have spent your entire life operating in a shallow bubble of fake spiritual wellness and manipulative lies. You think you can destroy a highly regulated, audited, and government-compliant financial institution with a few fabricated blog posts." I reached into my handbag and pulled out my cell phone, the exact same device that had just ended the entire life of my mother-in-law. I unlocked the screen and tapped open a highly secure encrypted file server. I held the glowing screen up so it illuminated the terrified face of the yoga instructor. Brooke narrowed her eyes, trying to read the dense legal text displayed on the screen. "Let me educate you on what real destruction looks like," I whispered, stepping into her personal space and forcing her to hold her ground. "This is an expedited federal arrest warrant drawn up specifically for you. My forensic auditing firm works hand in hand with federal regulators on a daily basis. When I started digging into the financial records of Andre, I naturally followed the money right to your doorstep." The color completely vanished from her face. Her breathing hitched, catching in her throat as she stared at the official seals on the digital document. "You are a remarkably sloppy criminal, Brooke," I continued mercilessly. "You applied for and received over $800,000 in federal pandemic relief loans. You claimed you had 45 full-time employees working for your spiritual wellness brand. You submitted phantom payrolls, fabricated tax documents, and completely fictitious employee rosters. I tracked the IP addresses used to submit those applications straight to the laptop you keep in your living room. You took money meant to keep legitimate small businesses alive during a global crisis, and you spent it on luxury cars, plastic surgery, and funding the pathetic lifestyle you shared with my husband. Brooke opened her mouth, but absolutely no sound came out. She was literally suffocating on the magnitude of her own consequences. She realized that her entire internet persona was nothing but a fragile house of cards that I had just casually knocked over. The federal prosecutor handling regional loan fraud happens to be a very close professional contact of mine. I stated my words, slicing through the cool air like a scalpel. Right now, your file is sitting quietly on a desk. But if you breathe a single word to the press, if you send one tweet, if you ever mention my name or the name of my company to anyone ever again, I will make one phone call. I will have your file moved to the absolute top of the priority stack. The federal agents who arrested Andre today will be kicking down the door of your apartment before sunrise. I lowered the phone and leaned in close enough that she could feel the absolute freezing certainty in my voice. You are going to face a mandatory minimum of 20 years in a federal penitentiary for defrauding the government, I whispered. And unlike Andre, you do not have a wealthy mother to hire you a fancy defense team. You will have a vastly overworked public defender who will strongly advise you to plead guilty and accept your fate. You will lose your freedom, your fake business, and every single follower you think you have. Brooke staggered backward, as if I had physically struck her. Her knees visibly buckled, and she leaned against the side of the passenger van to keep herself from collapsing onto the asphalt. Her entire body was trembling violently now. The facade of the confident media manipulator had completely dissolved, leaving behind a terrified, broken woman who realized she had just brought a knife to a nuclear war. I unlocked my car, the sleek headlights flashing in the dark parking lot. I opened the driver's side door and paused, looking back at her pathetic form one last time. I am giving you exactly one option, Brooke, I said, my voice carrying a terrifying finality. I am giving you a choice that you absolutely do not deserve. Run or rot. Brooke let out a strangled, sobbing gasp. The cheap knockoff designer handbag she had been clutching so desperately slipped from her trembling fingers. It plummeted toward the ground, landing with a heavy, wet splash directly into a filthy puddle of stagnant water and motor oil. She did not even try to retrieve it. She looked at the ruined bag and then looked at me, her eyes wide with total surrender. Without saying a single word, she spun around and sprinted across the parking lot. She ran toward the street, desperately waving her arms at a waiting rideshare vehicle that had just pulled up to the curb. She practically threw herself into the back seat, slamming the door shut behind her. The car immediately accelerated, peeling away from the curb and disappearing into the downtown traffic, carrying her completely out of my life and out of the state entirely. I slid into the plush leather seat of my car and closed the heavy door, shutting out the night air. I started the engine, the powerful motor purring quietly in the darkness. I placed my hands on the steering wheel and took a slow, deep breath. The purge was finally complete. I put the car in gear and drove smoothly out of the church parking lot, leaving the wreckage of their lives entirely in the rearview mirror. I was driving toward a future that belonged entirely to me, clean, powerful, and completely unburdened. 6 months passed, bringing a sweeping, absolute silence to the chaos that had once defined my life. The heavy, reverberating clang of a steel cell door sliding shut replaced the soft click of my luxury car doors. Andre sat on a thin, stiff mattress in a federal penitentiary, his face buried in his hands. The harsh fluorescent lights of the cell block illuminated the stark reality of his new existence. He had traded his custom-tailored Italian suits for a scratchy, oversized orange jumpsuit. There was no corner office, no leather chair, and absolutely no mistresses to stroke his fragile ego. The federal prosecutors had absolutely buried him under a mountain of irrefutable digital evidence. He was facing a mandatory minimum of 15 years for aggravated identity theft, wire fraud, and money laundering. His bank accounts were completely frozen and drained to pay the massive restitution he owed to the financial institutions he had defrauded. Andre was drowning in an ocean of debt and legal fees with absolutely no one left to save him. He had spent his entire life believing he was the smartest person in every single room, but he was ultimately nothing more than an arrogant fool who had engineered his own total destruction. Miles away from that prison cell, the consequences of greed were playing out in a dingy motel off the interstate. The neon sign outside the window buzzed and flickered, casting sickly red shadows across the stained carpet. Kyle sat on the edge of a sagging bed, staring blankly at the peeling wallpaper. His spectacular fall from Wall Street had been swift and merciless. When the federal investigation into Andre cracked wide open, the authorities easily traced the phantom payroll schemes and insider trading right back to the desk of Kyle. The Securities and Exchange Commission did not hesitate. They permanently revoked every single one of his trading licenses and handed him a lifetime ban from the financial industry. His prestigious investment firm fired him on the spot, issuing a public statement to distance themselves from his toxic crimes. A sharp knock on the hollow wooden door broke his miserable silence. Alicia stepped into the dim motel room looking sharper and healthier than she had in years. She had shed the oppressive weight of the Wilson family expectations, and it showed in her confident posture and clear eyes. She did not yell, and she did not cry. She simply walked over to the cheap laminate dresser and set down a thick manila envelope. Kyle looked up at the divorce papers, his face pale and defeated. Alicia did not offer a single word of comfort. She turned on her heel and walked out the door, leaving him to rot in the miserable reality he had built for himself. The majestic fall from grace was perhaps most spectacular for the woman who had orchestrated so much of the family toxicity. The relentless electronic beep of a barcode scanner was the only sound Brenda heard for 8 hours a day. She stood behind the metal cash register of a local discount dollar store, wearing a hideous bright green polyester uniform vest over a faded shirt. Her expensive salon highlights had grown out, revealing stark gray roots, and her manicured nails were chipped and broken from hauling heavy boxes of cheap laundry detergent. The church board of elders had shown her zero mercy. They legally mandated that she pay back every single cent of the $400,000 she had stolen. The courts were garnishing her minimum wage paycheck, keeping her trapped in a cycle of endless grueling labor. A customer stepped up to her register, placing a plastic basket of discount cleaning supplies on the counter. Brenda looked up and instantly froze. It was a woman from the church congregation, someone Brenda used to routinely invite to her exclusive country club brunches. The woman looked at Brenda with a mixture of profound pity and absolute disgust. She did not say hello. She simply handed Brenda exact change, took her receipt, and walked out the automatic doors without a single backward glance. Brenda swallowed hard, staring at the floor, as her entire social standing was completely obliterated. She had become a cautionary tale, the ultimate pariah in the wealthy suburban town she once believed she ruled. I did not have to lift a single finger to destroy any of them. I simply held up a mirror and let the blinding light of the truth expose the deep rot inside their lives. They had gladly destroyed themselves with their own insatiable greed and boundless arrogance. A warm tropical breeze washed over my face, carrying the sweet scent of salt and absolute freedom. I stood on the polished teak deck of a massive private yacht, the brilliant Miami sunshine reflecting off the turquoise waters of the Atlantic Ocean. I wore an immaculate white silk dress that flowed elegantly in the wind, a stark contrast to the dark tailored suits I wore in the boardroom. I held a crystal glass of expensive vintage wine, listening to the gentle rhythmic lapping of the waves against the hull of the boat. The sky was an endless expanse of perfect blue, completely devoid of clouds or storms. The secure, encrypted cell phone resting on the glass table next to me began to vibrate softly. I picked it up and answered the call. The acquisition of the European supply chain is complete. Boss, the crisp, professional voice of David, my executive assistant, announced through the speaker. The funds have been successfully transferred, and the International Board has unanimously approved your restructuring plan. We are officially global. Excellent work, David, I replied, taking a slow, satisfied sip of the rich red wine. Prepare the press release for tomorrow morning and take the rest of the week off. You have earned it. I ended the call and set the phone down, stepping up to the gleaming metal railing of the yacht. I looked out over the vast, glittering ocean, feeling a profound sense of total victory settle deep into my bones. I was completely unburdened, unapologetically wealthy, and entirely untouchable. The parasites who had tried to drain my life were gone, crushed under the weight of their own monumental failures. I closed my eyes and let the warm sun wash over me, knowing that the ultimate sweet revenge was simply living a beautiful, powerful, and fiercely independent life. The greatest lesson learned from this story is that your value is never defined by those who are committed to misunderstanding you. True family is not determined by blood, but by mutual respect and unconditional support. When toxic relatives attempt to diminish your light, the most powerful revenge is not seeking retaliation, but building an undeniably successful and authentic life on your own terms. True independence is your ultimate shield against manipulation. Never shrink yourself to fit into their broken narrative. We want to hear from you. Please share your own journey of leaving a toxic family right down below.